Chapter 22, The Rosicrucians. I'm somehow reading about the Rosicrucians in a different book at the same time. Amazing how things coincide the way they do. Speculation has been rife as to the origin of the Rosicrucians, and the many fables and legends connected with the subject have but little historical value. Owing to the great discrepancy between the information contained in the following article and that given in a more modern editions of the Encyclopedia Britannica, it has been deemed advisable to reprint the former. See the Encyclopedia Britannica, 3rd edition, volume 16, year 1797, Edinburgh, Bell and Manfacour. Rosicrucians, a name assumed by a sect or cabal of hermetical philosophers who arose as it has been said, or at least became first taken notice of in Germany in the beginning of the 14th century. They bound themselves together by a solemn secret, which they all swore inviolably to preserve. They obliged themselves at the admission into the order to a strict observance of certain established rules. They pretended to know all sciences and chiefly medicine, whereof they published themselves the restorers. They pretended to be masters of abundance of important secrets, and among others that of the philosopher's stone, all which they affirmed to have received by tradition from the ancient Egyptians, Chaldeans, the Magi, and the gymnosophists. They have been distinguished by several names accommodated to the several branches of their doctrine, because they pretend to protect the period of human life by means of certain nostrums, and even to restore youth. They were called immortals. As they pretended to know all things, they have been called Illuminati, and because they have made no appearance for several years, unless the sect of the Illuminated, which lately started up on the continent, derives its origin from them. They have been called the Invisible Brothers. Their society is frequently signed by the letters FRC, which some among them interpret Fratris Roris Cocti, it being pretended that the matter of the philosopher's stone is due, concocted, exalted, etc. Some who are no friends to Freemasonry make the present flourishing society of Freemasons a branch of the Rosicrucians, or rather the Rosicrucians themselves, under a new name or relation, viz. As retainers to building. And it is certain there are some Freemasons who have all the characters of Rosicrucians, but how the area and original of Freemasonry, but how the area and original of Freemasonry, and shoot, man, hold on, you're not supposed to have that many ands. But how the era and original of Freemasonry and that of Rosicrucianism, here fixed from Nadius, who has written expressly on the subject, conflict, we leave others to judge. Notwithstanding the pretended antiquity of the Rosicrucians, it is probable that the alchemists, Paracelsists, or fire philosophers who spread themselves through almost all Europe about the close of the 16th century, assumed about this period the obscure and ambiguous title of Rosicrucian Brethren, which commanded at first some degree of respect, as it seemed to be borrowed from the arms of Luther, which were a cross placed upon a rose. But the denomination evidently appears to be derived from the science of chemistry. It is not compounded, says Mathiam, as many imagine, of the two words rosa and crux, which signify rose and cross, but of the latter of these words and the Latin rose, which signifies dew. At the head of these fanatics were Robert Flood, an English physician, Jacob Benham, and Michael Mayer. But if rumor may be credited, the present illuminated have a head of higher rank. The common principles which serve as a kind of center of union to the Rosicrucian society are the following. They all maintain that the dissolution of bodies by the power of fire is the only way by which men can arrive at true wisdom and come to discern the first principles of things. They all acknowledge a certain analogy and harmony between the powers of nature and the doctrines of religion, and believe that the deity governs the kingdom of grace by the same laws with which he rules the kingdom of nature, and hence they are led to use chemical denominations to express the truth of religion. They all hold that there is a sort of divine energy or soul diffused through the frame of the universe, which some call the Argus, others the universal spirit, and which others mention under different appellations. They all talk in the most superstitious manner of what they call the signatures of things, of the power of the stars over the corporal beings and their particular influence upon the human race, of the efficacy of magic and the various ranks and orders of demons. These demons they divide into two orders, sylphs and gnomes. This article, having been written in 1747, only hinted at what the Rosicrucians might have been. Subsequent research upon the organization of the fraternity, its tenets, and its achievements shows it to have been a medium for the propagation of Gnosticism and a center for political activities. Before it conquered Freemasonry, which was officially instituted in 1717, many names were already associated intimately with the esoteric organization. Among others were Faustus Socinus, Caesar Cremoni, Michael Mayer, Valentine Andrea, Thomas Vaughan, Philoletus, Charles Blount, Frederick Hellevinus, Robert Simon, and Theophilus Desiderius. It is claimed that Faustus Socinus, named after Faustus the Manichae, nephew of Lelius Socinus, whose teacher was Camillo Renato, was an intimate of Rosicrucianism and the founder of the Socinians. Catholics and Protestants alike opposed Faustus Socinus in his efforts to graft a secret cult on the existing Orthodox religions, and in 1598 the people of Cracovia revolted by his doctrines, pillaged his house, burned his books and manuscripts, and almost massacred the author. He had sworn hatred to the church and busied himself in founding an association, the aims of which were to be subversive to all its teachings. And 2 years before his death, he was obliged to take refuge from his enemies with one Abraham Blonsky. The membership of the Rose Cross was composed of alchemists, astrologists, and spiritists whose quest was the search for the process for transmuting base metals into gold and the secret to life. The most of these generation was the root of principal alchemy. The Order of the Rose Cross revealed itself in 1614 with the appearance of the two books, Fama Fraternitatis and the Confessio, attributed to Valentine Andrea, giving the legend of the travels of Christian Rosencreutz. According to Charles T. McLean, 33-degree historian, Grand Lodge State of New York, this same legend had appeared as the work of Raymond Lully, who died in 1315. In this legend, translated into English in 1616 by Robert Flood, a symbolic personage called Christian Rosencreutz, destined to live 106 years on earth, travailed in the East, where he studied the Kabbalah, and on his return to the native Germany, he revealed the three disciples the secrets of secrets, the great secret of theosophy. Finally, he retired to a cave to finish his days in solitude, dying in 1484 at the age of 106. His disciples came and shrouded him and disappeared. His grave was to be unknown for 6 times 20 years, at the end of which period it was to become the hearth of the light destined to illuminate the world, at the time appointed by God. In 1604, chance brought men to this cave. On entering, great was their surprise to find it resplendent with a bright light. It contained an altar bearing upon a copper plate the inscription, "Living, I reserve this light for my grave." One mysterious figure was accompanied by this epigram, "Never vacant, A second figure, the yoke of the law. A third figure, the liberty of the Gospels. A fourth, the glory of the whole God. The hall still contained lamps burning without fuel, mirrors of various shapes, and books. Upon the wall was written, "In 6 times 20 years I will be discovered." The prophecy was fulfilled, added the fable by way of conclusion. How much more we got? I forgot. Oh. The pain. The pain. Shit. The movement was greatly furthered by the impulse given to when, after the appearance of the Famor Fraternitatis and Confessio, a German alchemist, Michael Mayer, an English physician, Robert Flood, a pietist, Julius Sperber, wrote treatises in defense or explanation of the Order of the Rose Cross. It has repeatedly been stated that Michael Mayer, who frequently visited England, was a friend of Robert Flood. He was the author of Themis Aurea and Silentem Post Clamors, both Rosicrucian works. His political influence may be judged from his career. Physician to Rudolph II, he was created by the Count of Palatinate and acted as advisor to his sovereign. In 1609, Rudolph II issued an imperial charter granting religious liberty to the Moravians. Masonic authorities state that Mayer, as a Rosicrucian, changed his official title to Summonus Magister, Sovereign Master, which is that used by all his successors and borne by the principal Solsian Rose Crew documents dating from the time of Faustus Socinus to that of Johann Wolf, which are preserved in the Sovereign Patriarch Council of Hamburg. That is the Supreme Jewish Lodge, secretly affiliated to International Masonry. How long have I gone? Man, once I get an hour and I haven't eaten all day, it becomes a chore. I hate when it's a chore. I enjoy doing this. In his book. No, hold on. In his book, Themis Aurea, written in 1616 and 1670 and printed in 1618, Mayer the Grand Master. I'm done. Chapter 22, Part 2, The Rosicrucians. In his book, Themis Aurea, written in 1616 and 1617 and printed in 1618, Mayer, the Grand Masters, refers to the resolution passed at a meeting in 1617 in which it was formally agreed that the Brotherhood of the Rose Cross must maintain the strictest secrecy for hundreds of years. On October 31st, 1617, the convention of the Seven at Magdeburg had indeed agreed to qualify its members during the ensuing 100 years of secrecy as the Invisibles. It had renewed its oath to destroy the Church of Jesus Christ and had decreed that in the year 1717, it would transform the fraternity into the association which could carry on a more or less open propaganda while adopting such measures of prudence as might then be deemed expedient by the leaders of the sect. Finally, the seven adopted definitely as being sufficiently original to appeal to the popular imagination Valentine Andrea's curious story of the Rose Cross, which had been secretly printed in Venice towards 1613. Robert Flood was the author of Tractatus Apologetitus, 1617, and Clavis Philosophia et Alchemia, 1633. He was greatly helped in the foundation of the Rose Cross Order in England by Francis Bacon, author of Nova Atlantis, 1624. Valentine Andrea, to whom, as we have seen, are ascribed the works Fama and Confessio, as well as Chemical Nuptials, had in 1640 been appointed preacher to the Duke of Brunswick, Wolfenbüttel, who was soon to make him his chaplain. To those who know the important part played by the Duke of Brunswick during the French Revolution, this entrance of the Brunswick family into the sect is very interesting. Excuse me. As a Rosicrucian, Andrea was the teacher of... Hold on. Okay. As a Rosicrucian, Andrea was the teacher of Comenius Amos Kominski, who frequently visited England during his mysterious political career. Bishop of the Moravian community, Comenius was the leader of the Moravian Brethren, a sect pledged to achieve the extermination of the Catholic Church, and which, being considered heretical, was also suspected of practicing secret Satanism. The Moravians were imbued with Socinianism, Socinianism. That is the doctrine of Lilius Socinus, which had been spread among them by his nephew Faustus Socinus, who had found refuge in Moravia when persecuted by the church. Their link with Rosicrucianism had already been established in the person of the pious Julius Sperber, who was also one of their leaders. When Comiskey was persecuted, he first went to London in 1641 and early the next year went to Sweden, where he was granted refuge and help by the powerful Swedish minister Count Axel Oxenstierna, himself a Rosicrucian adept and protector of another initiate, Ludwig van Geer from Holland. The combination of the pursuit of alchemy and Hermeticism was frequently evidenced even before the official appearance of Rosicrucianism. The influence of adepts on the destinies of nations was immense. To Queen Elizabeth, the advice of John Dee, her alchemist, was always considered in matters affecting national policy, and to Dee, his crystal gazer, Edward Kelly, was indispensable as a medium. Ludwig von Geer, one of the 7 present at Magdeburg, had settled in Sweden and had won over the Chancellor, Count Axel Oxenstierna, then the real regent, in view of the minority of Queen Christina. A great industrialist of Dutch birth with a colossal fortune made in the manufacture of cannon, he had become a baron, and as owner of 20 ships of the Swedish fleet, he was an indispensable man. Another striking Rosicrucian figure was Thomas Vaughan, Eugenius Philatelius, not to be confused with his pupil, George Starkey, known as Irenaeus Philatelius. It is said that it was Thomas Vaughan who, inspired by the writings of Nick Stone, conceived the idea of subverting to the ambition of the sect to which he belonged, the Guild of the Freemasons, which, owing to the universal character, lent itself better than any other to the realization of his project. Nick Stone was one of the 7 of the Convention of Magdeburg. As an architect belonging to the Guild of the Freemasons, he had helped Indigo Jones, the Grand Master of the English Lodges, which at this period was non-sectarian. On the other hand, as a Rosicrucian, he had grasped in the Luciferian sense the idea given by Faustus Socinus, and he had composed for the 9 grades of the fraternity rituals which the chiefs declared remarkable. His ritual of the 8th degree, Master Templi, was really satanic. Thomas Vaughan, struck by these manuscripts, wondered whether it would be possible to extend the teaching of the Rose Cross to all accepted Masons, who were then admitted to the lodges in the honorary capacity. The Freemasons received in their guild, under the names of accepted Masons, peers, and men of letters, or professional men, as well as rich bourgeois, I think that's bourgeois, who enhanced the brilliancy of their meetings and patronized their entertainments. These honorary members were their protectors and benefactors. Vaughan believed that this element, gifted with certain intellectual qualities, would lend itself better to the propagation of the principles of occult succanism than the workers of the fellow craft, and having made up his mind that this was the solution of the problem, he hastened to put it into practice. Some brothers of the Rose Cross were already mingling with the Freemasons. Among the members of the Warrington Lodge were Richard Pennock, James Collier, Richard Sankey, Henry Littler, John Elam, and Hugh Brewer. And in London, the Whartons and their friends had slipped into the lodge as accepted Masons. Thomas Vaughan encouraged them to spread the principles of Succanists. Finally, at a meeting on the May 1643, he announced that their desultory efforts at restrained proselytizing should be supplanted. Got lost. By a definite program of entering the guild lodges with the object of using them as instruments to an end. The account of this meeting of the 14th May 1643 is given in full in the memoirs of Philotites, and the whole plan of the Freemasonry of today is therefore revealed. So, blended are truth and fiction in the active career of this adventurous adept that Vaughan must always remain one of the most mysterious characters of Rosicrucianism. When the plague of 1665 drove the court from London to Oxford, Thomas Vaughan went thither with his patron, the king, and a little later took up his residence with the rector of Albury and Reverend Sandchem, at whose house, in February 27th of that year, he was killed by an explosion in the courts of chemical experiments. His work in masonry, however, has remained as his monument. Together with Elias Ashmole, pupil of Rabbi Solomon Frank and protege of James Praggett, Thomas Vaughan worked up the Masonic system of the first 3 degrees. These degrees, those of entered apprentice, fellow craft, and master mason, were devised for the temptation of the masses, while outside and above them continued the former secret system of the Rose Cross. 4 degrees of which, belonging to the Gold Cross, were known as: first, Cellator; second, Theocracy; third, Practice; and fourth, Philosophus, teaching merely the principles of alchemy, while the degrees of the Rose Cross were: 5th, Adeptus Minor; 6th, Adeptus Major; 7th, Adeptus Exceptus; 8th, Magister Templi; and 9th, Magus. The contemporaneous with, how do you say that word? Contemporaneous with the evolution of free thought against revealed. Well, I wish I knew what that word meant so that I could make the sentence make sense, but whatever. Contemporaneous with the evolution of free thought against revealed religion, broke the revolution against civil authority, plunging England into the throes of civil war. Oliver Cromwell was successful at the head of the Parliament troops, while Charles I was everywhere betrayed by men on whom he relied. Henry Blount was among the traitors accruing to Cromwell after the Battle of Edgehill. At least the defeat of the king was his pretext, for treason was everywhere premeditated. The word of order was given by the Rose Cross, which had spread rapidly among the Puritans. The year 1644 ended with the destruction of the royal power in February 9, 1649, the day on which the head of Charles I fell at Whitehall consummated its ruin. The royal power had, in fact, been wrecked when the troops of Parliament were victorious, when the Queen was obliged to take refuge in France, when the Prince Palatine Robert had been defeated, when York had been taken, and when the Commons had obtained against Laud, the Protestant Episcopal Bishop of London, Archbishop of Canterbury, the bill of attainder which declared him guilty of the crime of treason. Laud had stood for resistance to the Puritans. How many pages is this one? Hold on, we're going to finish it, though. I ain't stopping today. The connection of the Cromwell family with that of the celebrated Thomas Cromwell, Earl of Essex, whose political ideas formed in Italy under the guidance of Machiavelli had so greatly affected the trend of English history, is here not devoid of interest. In 1767, a document was discovered which revealed the existence of a society of Freemasons in Italy with about 64,000 members. The document said, "At last the great mine of the Freemasons of Naples is discovered, of whom the name but not the secret was known. The circumstances are alleged by which the discovery was brought about. A dying man revealed all to his confessor that he should inform the king thereof. A knight, who had been kept in great state by the society, having had his pension withheld, betrayed the Grand Master of the Order of the King. The Grand Master was the Duke of San Severo. The king secretly sent a confidential officer with 3 dragoons to the duke's mansion, with orders to seize him before he had time to speak to anyone and bring him to the palace. The order was carried out, but a few minutes after, a fire broke out in the duke's mansion, destroying his library, the real object being, as is supposed, to burn all writings having reference to Freemasonry. The fire was extinguished in the house guarded by troops. The duke, having been brought before the king, openly declared the object, system, seals, government, and possessions of the order. He was sent back to his palace, and there guarded by troops, lest he should be killed by his former colleagues. Freemasons have also been discovered at Florence, and the Pope and the Emperor have sent thither 24 theologians to put a stop to the disorder. The king acts with the greatest mercy towards all implicated to avoid the great dangers that might ensue from a contrary course. He has also appointed 4 persons of great standing to use the best means to destroy so abominable a sect, and has given notice to all the other sovereigns of Europe of his discovery and the abominable maxims of the sect, calling upon them to assist in the suppression, which it will be folly in them to refuse to do. For the order does not count its members by thousands, but by millions, especially among Jews and Protestants. Their frightful maxims are only known to the members of the 5th, 6th, and 7th lodges, whilst those of the first 3 know nothing. And those of the 4th act without knowing what they do. They derive their origin from England, and the founder of the sect was that infamous Cromwell, first bishop and then lover of Anne Boleyn, and then beheaded for his crimes, called in his day the scourge of rulers. He left the order an annual income of 10,000 sterling. It is divided into 7 lodges. The members of the 7th are called assessors, of the 6th grand masters, of the 5th architects, of the 4th executors. Here the secret ends. Of the 3rd recruiting, of the 2nd, the 1st novices and proselytes. Their infamous idea is based on the allegory of the Temple of Solomon, considered in the first splendor and then overthrown by the tyranny of the Assyrians and finally restored, thereby to signify the liberty of man after the creation of the world, the tyranny of the priesthood, kings, and laws, and the reestablishment of that liberty. Get that? Good. As for Oliver Cromwell, Lord Protector of England, there is no record of his having been an accepted Mason. He was, however, on the best of terms with Richard Penkett, and is supposed by many to have been secretly affiliated to the Rose Cross, but whether an adept or not, he served the purpose of the sect, destruction of the royal and ecclesiastical Christian power. After the death of Charles I, Cromwell appointed an assembly of lawyers and divines to consider the petition of Manasseh ben Israel, 1604 to 1657, demanding the abolition of the legal exclusion of the Jews from England. In December 1655, the legal prohibition was removed. 11 years after 1666 occurred the Great Fire of London. Does the following letter help to solve the mystery of this historical disaster? It was one of many written by the secretary interpreter of the Marquis de Lovus, an English spy, to his chief in England, published in London in 1697 by D. Jones Gent. of the firing of the city of London in 1666. My lord, I am fully satisfied by what I have both seen and heard at Paris and elsewhere that the Duke of York was in the year 1666 brought quite over to the French interest, and I have heard strange stories related concerning his conduct at the time of the dreadful conflagration of the city. Looking upon it Janus-like, with one face seeming concerned for that lamentable disaster, and with the other rejoicing to see that noble pile reduced to ashes and its citizens ruined, who had at all times been the greatest propagators for liberty and property, and oppressors of that religion which he now not only secretly protests, but was even ready publicly to own, and rewarding those incendiaries of St. James, who then were suspected generally to be Frenchmen, as your lordship well may remember, but by our minutes it does appear 12. Afterwards, James 2. Okay, wait. Ugh. These old people, old writings are. Sorry, just hold on. Here they were not such. Okay, let me do that again. Sorry, I don't give a shit. And the opposers of that religion, which he now not only secretly protests, but was even readily publicly to known, and rewarding those incendiaries of St. James, who then were suspected generally to be Frenchmen, as your lordship well may remember, but by our minutes it does not appear they were not such, but they were persons, at least many of them, set on the work of French councils, and such as at that time were of all men least suspected, I mean Jews, of which they had then several to pay, not only in England, but all over Christendom, not only to give them intelligence, in which they are wondrous active, but likewise to promote and act the worst of mischiefs, as which they make no bulk. By these fires have been kindled, not only in England, but in Germany, Poland, and elsewhere, which the Germans imputed to Turkish emissaries though they were Jews hired with French money. The Turkish policy not being so refined in mischief, these sorts of Jews put on the shape of what Christians they pleased, and of this sort employed by France there were and are still several in England, the names of one or two of which I think I shall be able to give your lordship in some time, though they go by several as time and occasion doth require, and so at present I remain, my lord, your lordship's most humble servant, Paris, April 7th, 1676, N. St. More shadows of the past, more strange suggestions to make the foundations of our belief in things as they seem. The last of the Grand Masters of the Rose Cross was Johann Christian Wolff, Masonry, which was a secret association, had maintained its existence for years, had uncovered itself, and became an avowed organization with the proclamation of the Anderson Constitution. Once in the open, it was to be the universal screen behind which all secret societies, whether theurgic or political, would operate clandestinely. Masonry, with its proclamation of the three philanthropic and altruistic degrees, with no apparent real secret, declaring itself Christian and non-political, would become the center in which ignorant men, recruited and duped, could act like puppets animated by unseen hands pulling unseen strings. Thus it came about that all blows dealt to Christianity and states were prepared by the secret societies acting behind the veil of Masonry. Chapter 23, Cathars, Albigenses, Waldenses. Manichaeism, with its hierarchy and missionary system, had taken root in Europe, and with its chief seat in Bulgaria, had thus found its way into northern Italy and the southern part of France. Unquestionably, Manichaeans, in their beliefs and teachings, the Cathars, purifiers of pure, held the unadulterated tradition of manes. Their hierarchy was that established by their founder. In the 12th century, their supreme chief was in Bulgaria, having under him bishops, priests, deacons, and simple perfects. These composed the class of perfects who were distinguished from the second degree of believers. As to the Albigeneses, their name derived from Albi, a town in Languedoc, covered not one but many sects issued from Manichaeism and Arianism, and counted also many Jews or Judaized Christians. Under this appellation of the Albigeneses, historians, whether political or religious, have almost unanimously included the Cathars. A revolt against the then existing church power of the 12th century is only too comprehensible when one recollects the excesses of which popes, bishops, and almost all dignitaries of the church were guilty. The pioneers of the rebellion had been Peter of Bruges, died 1126, and the monk Henry, died 1148. They had openly attacked the vices of the clergy and fallen victims, the first to his own fanaticism. He was killed by the mob, whose anger he had aroused by pulling down a wooden cross to be used as burning wood for the purpose of cooking meat on a Good Friday. The second was imprisoned by a bishop against whose vices he had raised his voice. Both had attacked the beliefs and practices of the church. Like the Baptists of today, they rejected the practice of baptism for children and denied the dogmas of transubstantiation and redemption through Christ. They gained many adherents and left numerous disciples whose Manichaean opposition to the church was identical with that of the Cathars. Upon such grounds fell the preaching of Peter Waldo, who, although he repudiated the dualist doctrine of the Manichaeans, formed a serious opposition to the church. He created the sect of the Waldenses, divided into two degrees, perfect and believers. The former made a vow of poverty and as such took the names of poor brethren. The later formed the outer or third order. From the south of France and northern Italy, persecution drove the Waldenses to the central of northern provinces of France, thence to England, then from Lombardy into Germany and Bohemia. John Wycliffe, 1324 to 1384 in England, and John Huss, 1369 to 1415 in Bohemia, were the foremost representatives, and in their later country they formed the Bohemian Brethren, who later also took the name of Moravian Brethren or Religious Masons. Shit, I gotta hit the button. There. All right. Chapter 24, Moravians, or the Moravian Brothers of the Order of Religious Freemasons, or Order of the Mustard Seed, or the Church Unitas Fraterum, or the Herrenhutter. Margrave Albert expelled the Jews from the town of Aglo in Moravia, on the ground that they had been in a league with the Taborites, the subversive element among the Hussites. The Taborites were Bohemians. The Moravian Brothers, or Unitas Fraterum, a Gnostic sect, were founded in 1457 and at Kuhnwald near Sephenberg by Gregory, the nephew of the Klaxstein leader Roxana. They were an offshoot of the Bohemian Brethren, said to represent the religious kernel of the Hussite movement. At the Synod of Lota near Reichenau in 1467, they constituted themselves into a church separate from the Klaxstein or National Church of Bohemia. The constitution of the society was revised at a second synod held at Lota under the direction of Luke of Prague, who may be regarded as their second founder. This reorganization enabled the society to grow rapidly. In the early years of the 16th century, the Unitas included nearly 400 congregations in Bohemia and Moravia. Moravia? That might be what it is. I think it's Moravia. With 150,000 members, and, including Poland, embraced 3 provinces, Bohemia, Moravia, where the Jews are the best educated of the inhabitants, and in a few small towns, form a full half of the population, and Poland. Each province had its own bishops and synods, but all were united in one church and governed by the General Synod. The Lutheran movement in Germany awakened lively interest among the brethren, and some unsuccessful attempts were made under the leadership of Augusta to unite with the Lutheran Church, 1528 to 1546. But when the Calvinist Reformation reached Bohemia, the brethren found themselves more in symphony with it than with the Lutheran. The Jesuit anti-Reformation, instigated by Rudolph and his brothers Matthias and Ferdinand, found the brethren a preposterous church, but the pitiless persecution which followed the unsuccessful attempt at revolution crushed the whole Protestantism of Bohemia, and in 1627 the evangelical churches there had ceased to exist. About the same time, the Polish branch of the unity, in which many refugees from Bohemia and Moravia had found a home, was absorbed in the Reformed Church of Poland. A few families, however, especially in Moravia, held religious services in secret, preserved the traditions of their fathers, and in spite of the vigilance of their enemies, maintained some correspondence with each other. In 1722, some of these left home and property to seek a place where they could worship in freedom. The first company, led by Christian David, a mechanic, settled by invitation from Count Zinzendorf on his estate in Bethersdorf near Zattu in Saxony. They were soon joined by others, about 300 coming within 7 years, and built a town which they called Herrenhut. The small community at first adopted the constitution and teaching of the old Unitas. The episcopate had been continued, and in 1735, David Nitschmann was consecrated first bishop of the renewed Moravian Church. The new settlement was not, however, destined to be simply a revival of the organization of the Bohemian Brethren. Zinzendorf, who had given them an asylum, came with his wife, family, and chaplain to live among the refugees. He was a Lutheran who accepted Spener's pietism, and he wished to form a society distinct from national churches and devoted to good works. After long negotiations, a union was effected between the Lutheran element and the adherents of the ancient Unitas Fraternum. The immigrants at Herrenhut attended the parish church at Berthelsdorf and were simply a Christian Gnostic society within the Lutheran Church. Ecclesia in Ecclesia. Ecclesialia in Ecclesia. This peculiarity is still to some extent preserved in the German branch of the church and the Moravian Brethren's congregation within the evangelical Protestant churches, which enables them to do evangelistic work without proselytizing. The society adopted a code of rules in 1727 and ordained 12 elders to carry on pastoral work. This was the revival of the Unitas Fraternum as a church. Besides congregational work, special home missions were and are carried on in each province. In the German province, there is a peculiar home mission called the Diaspora, which dates to 1829. The Moravians came to England in 1721, brought by Count Zinzendorf. The following extract from the work of an Anglican bishop, written in 1751, shows that they were not particularly appreciated in that country as a force of good. Of what dangerous consequence the Moravian system is to government and civil society appears by their progressive multiplicity of prevarications, lies, frauds, cheats, and juggling impostors, greatly detrimental to princes and states as well as ruinous to private persons, which have so plainly been proved by Mr. Reminus and others, particularly in the history of the Moravians. No, the Moravans. I Can't say that word. It's Moravians. The Moravians. Very lately published from the public acts of Bunyan and other authentic vouchers. Of this nature are their devouring the whole substance of any wealthy convert and declaring that the society may say to a young rich brother, either give up all that thou hast or get thee gone, sending away any of the society to the remotest parts of the world at a minute's warning by the authority of the Savior, who will have it done post haste, whereby any, though his majesty's subjects, whom they suspect or got him. All right. Or that dislike their proceedings, or for prudential reasons must be married up, or may discover any of their iniquities, are instantly sent into banishment and condemned to transportation, not for any crime, but for their virtue and duty, which is more than all the authority of Great Britain can do. For any crime without an open legal trial, making marriages void, though before contracted, unless the carnal cohabitation has been performed in the presence of the elders. Seducing men's wives and daughters, and then keeping them by force, or sending them out of the way, and allowing no power of earth to reclaim them, though the parents beg it on their knees. Taking away the natural authority of the parents and making their children disobey and renounce them under pretense of obeying the Savior, the Father that created them, thereby making the fifth commandment of no effect, sometimes bribing and sometimes threatening states as occasion serves, and denouncing a rugmenta regum if they are opposed, and telling princes that such or such a place in their dominions was founded by the Savior for his theocracy, which he won't fail to maintain. These things have been proved upon the Moravians, both as the doctrine and practice, by diverse instances, and that in fact they claim an independency on government appears from the letter to the regency of Bunyan from the Count Zinzendorf and his brethren, wherein it is said in plain terms that all the sovereigns on earth must consent to the theocracy in the Moravian brotherhood, or have no brethren in their dominions. I need not add that theocracy signifies an immediate government by God, which of course excludeth all civil authority. The Moravian dogma was spiritism, which generally means black magic. As for their moral code, it can be summarized in the few following words of Count Zinzendorf in a dialogue with Mr. Wesley. We reject all self-denial. We trample it underfoot. We believers do what we please and no more. Claiming to be free from all law by their marriage with Christ, they refuse to be bound by any law at all, either of the Old Testament or the New. To bring all sects under his sway, Roman Catholics, Socinians, fanatics, Chillidists, Anabaptists, etc., Count Zinzendorf made a new translation of the New Testament. This was the practice of almost all the Gnostic heretics in order to deceive and draw disciples, nor did they make any scruple of omissions, expungings, or any corruptions that might serve their purpose. Missionaries were sent abroad, everything being done by the Savior's injunction. Heaven for them is to consist in their being metamorphosed into female angels for a carnal enjoyment of Christ in his human nature, in the eternal bedchamber. Wow! Where in the scriptures do you find panegyrical hymns in honor of your phallus? Asked Levington. For what follows, we refer the reader to page 140 of the bishop's book. Count Zinzendorf is said to have been the head of the Rosicrucians from 1744 to 1749. He was on intimate terms with John Wesley, the founder of Methodism. Of all its names, that of the Order of Religious Freemasons is the most significant today. It should also be remembered that the head of this order was also the head of the esoteric Rosicrucians of the time. So, hold on, I shut this off. All right. Chapter 25, The Anabaptists, founded 1521. The Anabaptists were founded in 1521 by Nicholas Stork, Mark Stubner, and Thomas Munzer. The heresies were founded on the following Lutheran maxim interpreted subversively. A Christian man is a master of everything and is subject to no one. They further claim that the infant baptism is null, therefore adults only can be baptized. If the Anabaptists, writes Honnegus, a German Protestant writer, in La Réforme contre la Réforme, were not all equally intolerant, they were nevertheless all equally detested, hated, and persecuted by the Protestants much more than by the Catholics. Queen Elizabeth ordered them to be excluded from England. Madden, in Phantasmata, describes the religion in the following terms. We find among them claims to intercourse with God and angels, to the gift of prophecy, to the power of driving out evil spirits, to the right of persecuting opponents, to visions, ecstasies, trances, convulsive seizures attributed to supernatural influences, and all these evidences of epidemic religious mania in countries which were Protestant. At certain periods in its history, this sect wielded great power, and Madden further writes that in Westphalia, for a length of time, the entire Senate was composed of theomaniacs. As the Republic was composed alone of fools and madmen, it is incredible to what a length they carried their excesses in Munster. Each magistrate proposed for the rule of government that wild chimeras of his own imagination, disguised under the imposing name of revelation. It was a sad spectacle to hear the deliberations of a Senate composed altogether of fanatics, some being inspired in perfectly contrary way to that suggested to others. Nevertheless, each one adhering to the dictates of his inspiration, because he believed that a special revelation had been made to him. When such things, says Camille, take place in a country where pseudo-prophets are tolerated who disseminate terror and run about the streets without any clothing, when the multitude set these things down as superhuman phenomena, when the inspired of both sexes walk about thus in public places in the midst of their disciples and apostles, the will of the Supreme Being is supposed to serve as a rule and direction to all these extravagances that mortals fall into, and it is difficult to say where will end the excesses of this religious delirium. The Anabaptists, when they fell into the hands of their enemies, allowed their fingers, tongue, nose, and ears to be cut off, nay, even suffered themselves to be drowned by hundreds of torrents, rather than desist or depart for a moment from the orders they imagined came from God. In 1525, Luther headed an alliance of the princes and governments to repress these excesses, and they were defeated at the Battle of Frankenhausen in that year, their leader Thomas Munzer being seized and beheaded. In 1536, John Leyden proclaimed himself king of the New Jerusalem, but his glory was of short duration. He was taken by the ungodly and put to death. The principal leaders of the sect were John Matthias, John Beckhold, David George, William Hackett, Cotterus, Coleman, and Debericus. The principal offshoots of the Anabaptist fanaticism in Germany, Holland, and Switzerland were the Adamites, the Apostolics, the Taciturn, the Perfect, the Impeccable, the Liberated Brethren, the Sabbatarians, the Clancicalarians, the Manifestarians, the Bewailers, the Rejoicers, the Indifferent, the Sanguinarians, the Antimarians. All right. Have a happy Thanksgiving. All right. Chapter 26, Grand Lodge of England. founded 1717. John Valentinian Andre, the Rosicrucian, having elaborated a plan to merge all the existing religious societies into one organization, published in 1614 a book, Universal and General Reformation of the Whole Wide World, in which he advocated the foundation of a secret society of all classes pledged to work quietly for the benefit of their fellows. To this period also belongs the legend of Christian Rosicrucian. I still think it's crazy. Never mind. Andrea, however, failed in his endeavors, but Jan Amos Comenius joined actively in his efforts, and as early as 1628 begged leave to share in this work, of which he presently was given sole charge. About this time, Comenius wrote his renowned work, and all wisdom, the Pansophia, which embodied his ideas on the fountain of humanity's utopia. The Moravian schoolmaster Comenius, while doubtless an idealist, was also interested in Spiritism, prophecies, revolution, Antichrist, the millennium, and such like whims of a dangerous fanaticism. He collected the visions of the Anabaptists, Coterus, and those of Dabaricius, and published them at Amsterdam. Those visions promised such wonders as the extermination of the Pope, the House of Austria, Gustavus, King of Sweden, Cromwell, and others, and were of a most disturbing character. When Anderson undertook the task of uniting the old traditions of practical masonry with the more recent development and broadened ideas of the New World League, he incorporated in his book of Constitution a reproduction of the main parts of the plans and ideas of Comenius. Their true meaning was faithfully adhered to, and important and decisive passages were adopted almost literally. The transformation of the lodge was actually carried out in 1663 when, in the General Assembly of Masons, the masters of operative masonry, feeling themselves supplanted and overruled, realized that if they did not wish to forsake their lodge, they must unite with its new masters and subordinate themselves to their designs. Henry German, Lord St. Albans, was elected and installed Grand Master. Sir John Denham became his deputy, and Sir Christopher Wren and John Webb wardens. The English Grand Lodge, as we know it, was founded on June 24, 1717 by Anderson, Desaguliers, an expatriated Frenchman said to have been the head of the Rose Cross, Calvert, James King, Eliot, Lumsden, Madden, and George Payne. It works only the first 3 degrees: apprentice, fellow craft, and master mason. Blue masonry, and constitutes the nursery for the selection of initiates for the higher or so-called spurious masonry. Masons desirous of rising in the ranks of the fraternity are therefore obliged to enter the ancient and accepted Scottish rites. In England, ancient and accepted rites, Grand Orient, Memphis, and Merism, Swedenborg, or some other international order which works the higher grades and selects its members from graduates of the original English system. English Masonry claims to be a purely charitable institution. It is Blue Masonry which answers to the lesser mysteries of the ancients, wherein, in reality, nothing but exoteric doctrines were revealed, whilst spurious Masonry, or all subsequent degrees, for no one can be initiated into them who has not passed through the first 3 degrees, answer to the greater mysteries. According to Anderson's own showing, Stater, Freemasonry Universal, previous to the formation of the Grand Lodge in 1717, the ceremonies of the Freemasons were purely Christian, but soon after the important change, it was decided to widen the basis of the craft so that men of all religious persuasions could enter her portals and benefit by her teaching. On page 303 of the Rosicrucian, a Masonic record, can be found the Articles of Union, dated 1813. Of the 2 fraternities of Free and Accepted Masons of England, the Society of Free and Accepted Masons, and the Grand Lodge of the Society of Freemasons. At the same time, Grand Lodge agreed to recognize a 4th degree, that of Holy Royal Arch. In these articles, it is specified that the representation of a lodge in Grand Lodge shall be by its actual master, wardens, and one past master only. Prior to the revival in 1717 and the reconstruction of Masonry in its present symbolic form, we find in another article in the Rosicrucian and Masonic Record, page 167, that very little is known of the proceedings of Masonic bodies, from the fact that very few written documents were permitted to be recorded, and of these few, owing to the jealousy or overcaution of their rulers, many were burnt in London in 1721. We can accept the causes given above for the destruction of these documents with a smile. On initiation, Masons receive an alias by which name they are henceforth known in the lodge. All Masonry is founded on the usual system of sectarian help. Help a Mason supplants the Christian teaching of help everyone. Until the last few years, this rule had not assumed a subversive character. Lately, however, it is said that to get anywhere in business in the city, London, one must be a Mason. This has stimulated Masonic recruiting, implying as it does a virtual business boycott against non-Masons. Each new recruit weakens the forces of those whose free, unhampered judgment could serve the cause of real liberty, democracy, and humanity. Masonry, English and Continental, has been very useful to persons with political ambitions and minor mental and moral capacities. In Mon Conre Pratique, Corns des Insigniat Superior de la Franco-Macaroni, Right Écossaise, Assenete Septe, published in 1885 in Paris, page 206, and attributed to Paul Rosen, we are given the following as the esoteric explanation of the ritual of Master Mason, third degree. It is an interesting fact that very few of the editions of certain works quoted herein are accessible to the profane public in museums and libraries. The temple, being emblematic of the human body, the Master's Lodge is known as the middle chamber within which the most intimate mysteries of Freemasonry are celebrated. It represents the uterus wherein is accomplished the reproduction of all beings. The two parts, separated longitudinally by a dark curtain, represent one side, the west, dark and lightened only by a single light. The abode of death of the sterile seed is the ovary. That of the eastern side, brilliantly illuminated, is the seed fertilized by the fulfillment of the act of generation and absorbed by the uterus. The master holds the mallet, the two wardens, each holding a roll of cardboard 9 inches in circumference by 18 inches long. These rolls represent the membrane virile. In the middle of the lodge is a mattress, coffin or ditch, which symbolizes the bed, the pastios of the ancients upon which are performed the mysteries of human generation. This mattress, coffin, or ditch also represents the Arch of Noah and the ancient Ark of the Old Testament, these two arches being again the symbols of the place where the generation of beings is accomplished. The acacia, the initiatic emblem of the Gauls and Scandinavians, and the fig tree, the initiatic emblem of the Syrians and the Orientals, signify that all the mysteries are derived from one source and rest on one base, that of India. The phallus is used by the Freemasons in the degree of master, where it is designated by the word Mahabon. This fecundation is supposed to take place as follows. In the early period of initiation, the seed of the unfertilized grain is dead. The candidate bearing within him this inert seed is a male, as he only wears upon his breast the compass emblem of the membrane virile. He is stretched upon a mattress or in a coffin or ditch, emblematic of the bed of the pastos or the mysteries of generation. Neither the second nor the first warden can endow him with life. Alone the worshipful master, wearing upon his chest the square, symbol of the genitalia maloris, representing the female, the lodge, can fertilize this seed by leaning over the candidate, who, representing the male, unites with him by the 5 points of perfection. The seed is fertilized by the union of the male and the female, and the lodge becomes pregnant of the candidate, which she brings into the world 9 months later as perfect master. 4th degree, it being established that 9 full months must have passed since the aspirant had received the degree of Master Mason. In summing up, the basis on which are founded the first 3 degrees of practical masonry are that the apprentice Boaz, the personification of Osiris or of Bacchus, coming to search for truth in the lodge, finds that he is a male god and incomplete for the generation of beings. That the companion Jachin, personification of Isis or Venus, the female god, completes the male god by rendering possible the generation of beings. That the master Mahobon, or Macabanek, is the hermaphroditic complete son of Loth and his daughter, son of the sun and the earth. And that because 1. All originates by generation and not by creation, which is only the simple induction of generation. 2. Corruption or destruction follows generation in all its works. 3. Generation restores, under all other forms, the effects of destruction. The formula of the 3 first degrees of Freemasonry is, therefore, the incomplete man, the profane, by initiation in Freemasonry, becomes Boaz and is completed by Jachin in the lodge, which restores his corrupted divinity in Mahabon. The special Masonic significance of the flamboyant star, or seal of Solomon, in Masonry is essentially the creative element. Man reclining presents a protuberance in the middle. So it's got that little Judean star in there. Right by that, where it said that. It's seal of Solomon, the special significance of the flamboyant star. That's what they call it. They call it a flamboyant star. Fitting. The man reclining presents a protuberance in the middle. Women reclining, on the contrary, presents a cavity in the middle. The 2 enlaced form a flamboyant star. Small wonder that Mackey states that no eunuch can be initiated a Mason. Unfortunately, many corrupt and vicious persons seek Masonic protection, and it is to the interest of all such aspirants to power thus to encourage vice and corruption through blackmail, using their votaries in the sect to further their own private ends. This is the fundamental danger inherent in all secret societies, whatever the reputation, where power is the object. A Mason is said to demit from the order when he withdraws from all connection with it. It relieves the individual from pecuniary contributions and debars him from pecuniary relief, but it does not cancel his Masonic obligations, nor exempt him from that wholesome control which the order exercises over the moral conduct of its members. In this respect, the Mason is once a Mason and always a Mason. The fact that a Mason, not a member of any particular lodge, but who has been guilty of immoral or unmasonic conduct, can be tried and punished by any lodge within those jurisdictions he may be residing, is not to be doubted. Quoting Brother Moore from Moore's Magazine, Volume 1, page 36. Again, every Mason is bound to obey the summons of the Lodge of Master Masons, whether he be a member or otherwise. This obligation on the part of an individual clearly implies a power in the lodge to investigate and control his conduct in all things which concern the interest of the institution. The clipping from the Daily Telegraph of October 15, 1930, which we reproduce herewith, shows the organization of a Masonic bureaucracy within our midst, an imperium in imperio of political office holders and magistrates, pledged first to Freemasonry, then possibly to the people. It says, Brighton Borough Lodge consecrated. The Brighton Borough Lodge of Freemasons, the first of its kind in the Province of Sussex, was consecrated today by Provincial Grand Master Major R.L. Thornton. The lodge will comprise past and present members of Brighton Town Council and magistrates, and the present mayor, Councillor H.W. Aldrich, is its first master. The installation of the worshipful master was performed by the Deputy Provincial Grand Master, Dr. H. Gervis, who is an alderman and past mayor of Brighton. The mayor-elect, Alderman S.C. Thompson, will be the first initiate. Other officers are yada, 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 yada. The Grand Masters of the United Grand Lodge of England have been 1813 H.R.H., the Duke of Sussex, K.G., 1843, the Earl of Zetland, K.T., 1870, the Marquis of Ripon, K.G., 1874, H.R.H., the Prince of Wales, 1908, Lord Ampthil. All right, Chapter 27, The Gospel of Revolution. Apart from the Rosicrucians already mentioned, we see the foundation and growth of such societies as 1. The strict observance of the Baron Hund and the notorious Jew Luke, who had assumed the name of Johnson and several other aliases. It recruited its members in the lodges and went from occultism to political intrigue, later even formulating a plan of economic and financial rule. 2. The Martinists, which founded by a Portuguese Marano Jew, Martinez des Pasquale, united political intrigues fomented for the overthrow of the monarchy, together with magical practices. It numbered among its members the chief politicians who prepared the French Revolution. These were Savalette, Delange, William Law, and Mirabeau. 3. The Scottish Rite. 4. The Moravian brothers. 5. The Alta Vendita. And 6. The Egyptian rites of Cagliostro, Miserem. The adepts of all these different rites knew but little beyond the fact that they had shaken off the yoke of Christian principles, which were replaced by the cult of nature and, in almost all cases, licentiousness. They were but mere puppets manipulated by unseen men, whose sinister aims were the destruction of Christianity and the disruption of states, and to whom all the above-named orders of organizations were but so many recruiting grounds. It was only when each and all had gathered sufficient strength that the invisible masters attempted to unite them all under one supreme sway, namely that of Illuminism at the Covenant of Wilhelmsbad in 1782. Illuminism represented the efforts of the heads of the powerful Jewish Kahal, which has ever striven for the attainment of political, financial, economic, and moral world domination. The movement had been founded in 1776 by Adam Weishaupt. Bernard Lazare, himself a Jew, has written that there were Jews behind Weishaupt, and upon a close study of the Illuminism, we find that the destructive forces which culminated in the French Revolution were of three kinds: financial, intellectual, and anti-Christian. In the first class, we come upon the names of Jewish financiers such as Daniel Itzig, Friedlander, Surf Beer, Benjamin and Abraham Goldsmith, Moses Mokada, Vital Hain Ephraim. In the second category, we find Moses Mendelssohn, Naphtali Wesley, Moses Hersham, who are the inspirers of Lessing, Frederick Nicolai, Weishaupt, Mirabeau, L'Abbe Gregor, the Duke of Brunswick, Wolfenbüttel, and Anacharsis Cloots. Lastly, the third class is composed mostly of the group known as the Encyclopedists: De Albert, Diderot, Rousseau, Voltaire, and of all the Kabbalists practicing magic, and among whom we find Martinez des Pasquale, Lucht, the enigmatic Count of Saint-Germain, Falk, and Joseph Balsamo, surnamed Cagliostro. The objects of this powerful organization of the Bavarian Illuminati were 1. The destruction of Christianity and of all monarchical governments. 2. The destruction of nations as such in favor of universal internationalism. 3. The discouragement of patriotic and loyal effort branded as narrow-minded prejudice incapable with the tenets of goodwill to all men and the cry of universal brotherhood. 4. The abolition of family ties and of marriage by means of systematic corruption. 5. The suppression of the rights of inheritance and property. Moses Mendelssohn, himself the head of the Haskalah Jewish Illuminati, incorporated with the Bavarian Illuminati of Weishaupt and with the prominent members of the other revolutionary secret societies aspiring to political power. But in 1784, the Elector of Bavaria made an abortive effort to stamp out the conspiracy, which, being international, was necessarily impervious to local measures. The poison of subversion was working in France, where on January 21st, 1793, it culminated in the death on the scaffold of Louis XVI, an event that, in Masonic jargon, is known as the Second Cannon Shot. The capture of Rome by Cadorna in 1870 was the third. As a further confirmation of concerted Masonic action, let us bring yet another illustration. In the first days of the French Revolution, 1848, 300 Freemasons with their banners flying over brethren of every rite representing French Freemasonry marched to the Hotel de Ville and there offered their banner to the provisional government of the Republic, proclaiming aloud the part they had just taken in the glorious revolution. M. de Lamartine made them this answer, which was received with enthusiasm by the Freemasonry lodges. It is from the depths of your lodges that the ideas have emanated, first in the dark, then in the twilight, and now in the full light of day, which have laid the foundations of the revolutions of 1789, 1830, and 1849. 14 days later, a new deputation of the Grand Orient, adorned with their Masonic scarfs and jewels, repaired to the Hotel de Ville. They were received by A. Cremieux and Garner pages, attended by pages who also wore their Masonic emblems. The representative of the Grand Master spoke thus: French Freemasonry cannot contain her universal burst of sympathy with the great social and national movement which has just been effected. The Freemasons hail with joy the triumph of their principles and boast of being able to say that the whole country has received through you a Masonic consecration. 40,000 Freemasons and 500 lodges, forming but one heart and one soul, assure here of their support happily to lead to the end of the work of regeneration so gloriously begun. Brother Cremieux, a Jewish brother, member of the Provisional Government, replied, Citizens and brothers of the Grand Orient, the Provisional Government accepts with pleasure your useful and complete adhesion. The Republic exists in Freemasonry. If the Republic do as the Freemasons have done, it will become the glowing pledge of union with all men in all parts of the globe and on all sides of our triangle. If the wielding of power and their national political, economic, and financial strength over the peoples by a few hidden hands can result in such calamitous upheavals as the French Revolution, the World War of 1914, and the Russian Revolution of 1917, were it not wise to apply the lessons of experience and ascertain whether the supposed harmless masonry of today does not again serve as a screen or curtain behind which thrive secret societies no less subversive, revolutionary, and demoralizing than those which we have just so briefly sketched? We know that most of them, such as the Martinists, the Illuminatis, the Scottish Rite, and the Egyptian lodges of Memphis and Mizraim, still exist today. So, on what grounds can we base our assumption of a change of the revolutionary and anti-Christian principles? In the face of late events, namely the Peace Conference, the creation of the League of Nations, the amalgamation of international resources, the confiscatory inheritance taxes, the development of international finance, the proposed establishment of the international non-Christian cult, have we the right to refrain from lifting the veil of Masonry beyond which subversive movements are so conveniently hidden? All right. Chapter 28, Preparation. This chapter is compiled largely of extracts, some transcribed verbatim and others elaborated to include information necessary to the reader, from History of Freemason and Concordant Orders by H.L. Stilson and W.J. Hugin. A bunch of other assholes. Oh, Domenico Margajota, 33rd degree. And then some other things. A lot of degrees in there, though. I don't know who they are. Get the book. You can find out. It is necessary to give a brief review of the history of ancient and accepted Scottish rites. This society originates from the rite called Scottish of Perfection, or Herodom in 25 degrees, worked in the 18th century in Europe by Masons devoting themselves to occultism. The following statement with regard to the introduction of this rite in America is made in a report by Albert Pike. We could soon learn how it was that the council degrees came from 1766 from France and not from Prussia. In 1761, the lodges and councils of the superior degrees being extended throughout Europe, Frederick II, Frederick the Great, King of Prussia, as Grand Commander of the Order of the Princes of the Royal Secret, or 32nd degrees, was by general consent acknowledged and recognized as sovereign and supreme head of the Scottish Rite. On the 25th of October, 1762, the Grand Masonic Constitutions were finally ratified in Berlin and proclaimed for the government of all Masonic bodies working in the Scottish Rite over the two hemispheres. And in the same year, they were transmitted to the Jew, Stephen Morin, who had been appointed at the request of Lecorne in August 1761, Inspector General for the New World by the Grand Consistory of Princes of the Royal Secret, convened at Paris under the presidency of Chillian de Joinville, representative of Frederick the Great and subordinate general of the order. It will be remembered that the 33rd degree was not then created, and under Frederick the Great there was no rank higher than the 32nd degree, nor anybody superior to a consistory. Morin went to Santo Domingo, where he was joined by Moses M. Hayes and Henry Andrew Franken. The latter founded a branch of the Rite of Jamaica, while to the former was entrusted the task of founding lodges in North America. The Jew Hayes established a Sublime Lodge of Perfection in Boston, of which he constituted himself Grand Master and charged one of his co-religionists and brother Mason Isaac da Costa, who in 1758 had founded the St. Andrew Lodge in Boston with the mission of introducing Masonry into South Carolina. Though on August 22nd in 1766, Bro Morin's patent was revoked by the Grand Body in Paris for propagating strange and monstrous doctrines, exercising bad faith, etc., and given to Bro Martin, Morin continued constituting chapters and councils, and with, where the hell does that go? Da Costa? Why does it do that? All right. Let me try it again. And given to Bro Martin, Morin continued constituting chapters and councils, and with Da Costa in 1783, 17 years after his patent had been annulled, he erected in Charleston the Grand Lodge of Perfection. Hold on. I want to go back and read this. Sovereign Grand Inspector General, the 33rd and ultimate degree of the ancient and accepted Scottish Rite. It is not known when or where this grade originated. The theory which ascribes it to the King of Prussia has long since been disregarded by intelligent Masons. The number of inspectors in the Kingdom of the Republic must not exceed 9. These, organized in a body, constitute the Supreme Council, which claims jurisdiction over all the ineffable and sublime degrees. The presiding officer is styled Sovereign Grand Commander. See also Blatchard, 33rd Scottish Rite Masonry, Volume 2, page 484. And though made within the memory of men now living, we read in the same note by McCoy, it is not certainly known when or where this degree originated. That is to say, its original is concealed. This is the most infamous Masonic act next to the burning their records of 59 years before the war, American Civil War, to hide treason. But slavery then ruled the country, and this 33rd Charleston degree ruled the lodge. And the Southern Lodge rooms worked up the most unjustifiable and infamous war on record. The Southern people were dragooned into it by leaders secretly sworn to obey Masonic leaders or have their throats cut. Oh! That was just some of the linear notes. Sorry. Thought it looked important. DaCosta was the Grand Master. Joseph M. Meyer was his eventual successor. And when the Grand Counselor of Princess of Jerusalem was established in Charleston, February 20th, 1788, he, as one of the deputy inspectors who established it, deposited in the archives certified copies of the degree of Royal and Selected Masters from guidance and government of the new body. The two Masonic powers of Boston and Charleston created numerous lodges and inner shrines in the United States and gave themselves the title of Mother Lodges of the United States. In view of the historical fact that the American War of Independence broke out in 1773, it is interesting to find that the Lodge of Perfection in Albany, New York, was directed as early as 1770 for transmit reporters to Berlin. This indeed becomes significant when considered with the circumstances surrounding the Boston Tea Party, which are so ably described in the History of Freemasonry and Concordant Orders by Stilson and Hugin, that they take the liberty of here transcribing some lines from this remarkable publication. Grand Master Joseph Warren was appointed on March 3, 1772 by the Grand Master of Scotland, Grand Master of Masons for the continent of America. Tradition says that the Mohawks, the High Sons of Liberty, met at the lodge at the Green Dragon Tavern, which was denounced by the Tories as the nest of traitors. General Joseph Warren and other leading Masons made it to the headquarters of the Revolution. On November 30th, 1773, the Lodge of St. Andrews that founded the DaCosta, on which Warren was a member, was closed without transaction of any business in consequences of the fewness of the brethren present. The consignees of tea having broken up the brethren's nerve on the 16th of December following, it is said the line of march was taken from the lodge room to destroy the tea on the then arriving ships. On April 8, 1776, the Grand Lodge was convened for the performance of a sad and solemn duty, that of attending the funeral of Grand Master Warren, who was killed at Bunker Hill. In 1738, Pope Clement XII had excommunicated the Freemasons. We extract the following instructive points from Adreno Lemmy by Marigoda. Sovereign Princes of Jerusalem was the title borne by the deputies of the Grand Master when they received missions to found lodges and visit regions where they had high jurisdiction. The name was that of a function and not a degree of initiation, and there was one deputy only for each region. On May 15, 1781, at the Convention of Deputy Inspectors, convoked by Hayes and Myers at Philadelphia, Moses Cohen was named Deputy Inspector of Jamaica, as Franken, originally appointed by Stephen Moran to found lodges there, had neglected his mandate. Soon, another Jewish Freemason came to Jamaica. This was Hyman Isaac Long, who derived his powers from Moran through Franken, Hayes, Spitzer, and Moses Cohen, and who was to play a great role in the sect. The Convention of Philadelphia had decided that, in the future, there might be several sovereign princes of Jerusalem per region. By virtue of this decision, Moses Cohen conferred this title on Isaac Long, who, finding his sphere of action too restricted at Jamaica, soon went to Charleston. He was an active man who had formed great plans. Not only did he create other lodges, but he brought other rites, such as that of Royal Arch, under the obedience of the Mother Lodge at Charleston. The Mother Lodge at Boston, however, did not prosper. Nevertheless, when one thinks of the immense territory of the United States, one understands that the lodges at that start could only be very few and far between. So Masonry vegetated for a long time in North America. In 1795, Isaac Long went to Europe, leaving Colonel John Mitchell the direction of the Mother Lodge of Charleston. When he returned to the United States 6 years later, he brought the plan of his great idea, which was universal. With Colonel John Mitchell, Dr. Frederick Dalco, Abraham Alexander, Isaac Alud, Emmanuel de la Motta, all sovereign princes of Jerusalem, he constituted this rite, taking 25 degrees of the system of heirloom, 6 Templar grades in which were merged 4 degrees borrowed from the German Illuminism of Adam Weishaupt, and 2 grades called grades of administration, the last of which supplanted the function of deputy inspector, sovereign prince of Jerusalem, and took the title of sovereign grand inspector general, 33rd and last degree. This was his crowning achievement. Isaac Long gave the institution the name of Ancient and Accepted Scottish Rites, and the first great constitutions were signed at Charleston on May 31st, 1801. It was Isaac Long who created de Grasse and his father-in-law, de la Hogue, Deputy Grand Inspectors General. In order to ensure great popularity of the rite, he linked it directly with the Templars by a mysterious legend. Hold on. I gotta get a drink. Never thought reading would be so taxing to a soul. Where the fuck was I? Oh, yes. In order to ensure great popularity for the rite, he linked it directly with the Templars by the mysterious legend. The high grades of other rites had already thought of pretending to avenge the Templars, condemned in the Middle Ages by the papacy and the monarchy. In the ceremonial of certain initiations, a pretext was thus contrived for swearing hatred and death to royalty and the church. But Isaac Long had found better than that, and according to the tradition, the Knights Templar convicted of secret conspiracy of malevolent occultism, had taken refuge in Scotland, where they succeeded in eluding their pursuers. It was said that they had succeeded in burying the head of the Grand Master Jacques Bourgoudin de Molay from the executioner after it had been severed from the body, and that they had contrived to place in safety the monstrous idol called Baphomet, which they worshipped in their secret assemblies. When Long arrived in Charleston in 1801, he brought with him this Baphomet, which he claimed to have recovered, as well as a skull which he declared to be that of the Grand Master Molay. They were signal relics, holy things. Long affirmed that he had been assured by the good God in person that victories over the church were contingent on these precious relics, and that the Templar Baphomet was the palladium which would lead Freemasonry to victory. Well, isn't that quaint? To this, other authors have added that this skull is known as the relic of Saint Jacques and is placed upon a high pedestal in the Hall of Supreme Council of Scottish Rites. In the temple at Charleston, where annually, on the 11th of March, it talks and vomits flames. Its conversational propensities were, however, not revealed until Gallatin Mackey, who claimed to be the reincarnation of Jacques de Molay, developed the proclivity for going into an annual trance on the 11th of March. This trance lasted about 1 hour, during which the skull conversed volubly about itself and all sorts of other things. Pursuing the subject further, Marjota states that The Mother Lodge of Boston has ceased functioning for some years, but that of Charleston constituted according to the new Scottish system in 33rd degrees because the root of the tree, which was to spread its branches over the entire world. The Superior Lodge of the Grand Sovereign Inspectors General in each country was to be called the Supreme Council, and it is from the Supreme Council of Charleston that all the others were to emanate. It is thus the first Supreme Council of the globe. Such is the history of the origin of this rite, which attracted Mazzini's attention for during the years which preceded the taking of Rome by the army of Piedmont. He could see that the provisions of Isaac Long had been realized. So it was in Pike, the successor of Long, himself the sovereign commander Grand Master, that the great revolutionary conspirators sought an ally in his work, the object of which was the total destruction of the church. The following address, issued from Paris by Giuseppe Mazzini to his friends in Italy, October 1846, fully set forth the deep-laid plans by which Freemasonry sought to engage all classes. In great countries, it is by the people we must go to regeneration. In yours, by the princes. We must absolutely make them on our side. It is easy. How many more pages, guys? Oh, I'm so close. Hold on. I want to finish it. But I can tell. I'm getting silly with it. I don't want to get silly with it because to me it's pretty important shit. I don't give a fuck what anyone else thinks. The Pope will march and reform through principle and of necessity. The King of Piedmont through the idea of the crown of Italy. The Grand Duke of Tuscany through inclination and irritation. The King of Naples through force. And the little princes will have to think of other things beside reform. The people yet in servitude can only sing its wants. Profit by the least concession to assemble the masses, were it only to testify gratitude. Fetes, songs, assemblies, numerous relations established among men of all opinions suffice to make ideas gush out, to give to the people a feeling of its strength and render it exacting. Italy is still what France was before the Revolution. She wants then Mirabeau, Lafayette, and others. A great lord may be held back by his material interests, but he may be taken by vanity. Leave him the chief place, whilst he will go with you. There are few who would go to the end. The essential thing is that the goal of the great revolution be unknown to them. Let us never permit them to see more than the first step. In Italy, the clergy are rich in money and the faith of the people. You must manage them in both interests and as much as possible make their influence of use. Learned discussions are neither necessary nor opportune. There are regenerative words which contain all that need to often repeated to the people. There are regenerative words which contain all that need be often repeated to the people. Liberty, rights of man, progress, equality, fraternity are what the people will understand above all when opposed to the words despotism, privileges, tyranny, etc., etc. Nearly 2,000 years ago, a great philosopher called Christ preached the fraternity which the world yet seeks. Accept, then, all the help offered you. Whoever will make one step towards you must be yours till he quits you. A king gives a more liberal law. Applaud him, and ask for the one that must follow. A minister shows intention of progress. Give him out as a model. A lord affects to pout at his privileges. Put yourself under his direction. If he will stop, you will have time to let him go. He will remain isolated and without strength against you, and you will have 1,000 ways to make unpopular all who oppose your projects. All personal discontent, all deception, all bruised ambition may serve the cause of progress by giving them a new direction. The army is the greatest enemy to the progress of socialism. It must be paralyzed by the education of the people. Clerical power is personified in the Jesuits. The odom of that name is already a power for the socialists. Make use of it. Associate. Everything is in that word. The secret societies give irresistible strength to the party that can call upon them. Do not fear to see them split. The more, the better. All go to the same end by different ways. The secret will be often violated, so much the better. The secret is necessary to give security to the members, but a certain transparency is needed to conspire fire to the stationary. Courage, then, and persevere. That Freemasonry has not always enjoyed immunity, the following quotation will serve to show. In the year 1735, the State General of Holland prescribed the secret Masonic League, and the French government imitated the example in 1735. In 1757, in Scotland, the Synod of Stirling adopted a resolution debarring or adhering Freemasons from the ordinances of religion. The Great Council of Berne prescribed Freemasonry in 1748. Bavaria followed in 1799, and its total suppression took place in 1845. The Regency of Milan and the Governor of Venice acted in a similar manner by it in 1814. John the Sixth, King of Portugal, prohibited Freemasonry in the strictest manner in 1816 and renewed it in 1824. In 1820, several lodges were closed in Prussia for political intrigues, and in the same year, Alexander I banished the order from the whole Russian Empire. A similar occurrence took place 4 years later in Modena and Spain. Yet today, some men boast of belonging to a secret society, the members of which were declared by an act of George III felons and liable to transportation for life. Speaking of Masons, in 1876, Richard Carlisle wrote, "Let them not wait to be disbanded by the legislature as a useless and mischievous association, but let them anticipate the spirit of a coming age. The deluge of mystery has not only overwhelmed Babylon, but Egypt, Greece, Rome, and will, if we do not light up the spirit of revelation in time, most assuredly overthrow this British nation. It is even now in danger from the dissension of its internal mysteries, of becoming an easy prey to some more barbarously mysterious power. Thus fell Babylon, Egypt, Jerusalem, Greece, Rome, and why not Britain? If Britain retains those seeds of disease and weakness, tell me not that the safety of a country is in its superstition or in its secret and mysterious bands." This warning, however, passed unheeded. During the time that has elapsed between the publication of Carlyle's book and the present day, we see England honeycombed with societies, subversive of law, order, and morals. Numerous are the homes which have become resorts where today the shameful orgies of Menahem are enacted anew. They are the secret haunts of social cliques and associations, and behind such screens as art, antiques, and dressmaking thrive as though they were highly protected. The white slave traffic, the dope traffic, and gambling which serve as a dragnet and decoy for the service of the great plan. Pan! All right, chapter, 29? 29, General Pepe and the Big Union. At the present moment, when we are surfeited with the words unions and mergers, to say nothing of cartels, a new interest is awakened by the perusal of Thomas Frost's book on secret societies, from which we extract the following. Two results of great importance in the progress of the European Revolution proceeded from the events that occurred at Naples in 1820 and 21. One was the reorganization of the Cabroni, consequent upon the publicity given to the system when it had brought about the revolution, and the secrecy in which it had hitherto been enveloped was no longer deemed necessary. The other was the extension of the system beyond the Alps. When the Neapolitan Revolution had been effected, the Cabroni, let me see, it's Cabroni? Carbonari emerged from their mystery, published their constitution and statutes, and ceased to conceal their patents and their cards of membership. the Papal States in Lombardy and in Piedmont, the veil of secrecy was maintained for a little time longer, partly through the adoption by the Cabrani in those portions of the peninsula of symbols and passwords different from those of the Neapolitan lodges, partly by the formation of the various societies of the Adelphi, the Guelphs, the Brother Protectors, and the Italian Federari, which were similar and yet not the same, though all holding the same principles and having a common object. But after the collapse of the Piedmontese Revolution, so much doubt and fear existed among the leaders as to the extent to which the secrets of the system were known that they were all effaced and consigned to oblivion. The scattered directors of the movement drew together the broken threads of the conspiracy as soon as they were able, but with a new nomenclature and a new symbolism. The dispersion of the Carbonaro leaders had, at the same time, the effect of extending the system in France, where it had been introduced towards the end of 1820, and creating centuries of revolutionary agitation in the foreign cities in which they temporarily located themselves. General Pepe proceeded to Barcelona when the counter-revolution was imminent at Naples and his life was no longer safe there. And to the same city went several of the Piedmontese revolutionists when their country was Austrianized after the same lawless fashion. Scalvini and Ugoni took refuge at Geneva. Others of the proscribed proceeded to London. This dispersion and the progress which Carbonarism was making in France suggested to General Pepe the idea of an international secret society which should combine for a common purpose the advanced political reformers of all the European states. Shortly after his arrival at Madrid, to which city he proceeded from Barcelona, he propounded to 2 or 3 ultra-liberal deputies the plan of this society, the object of which, he says, was to enable the members to correspond and by these means preclude the possibility of a renewal of that want of union which had been experienced amongst the most noted patriots of Spain and Portugal, Naples, and Piedmont. Several deputies of the Cortes were inclined to regard such an association as extremely beneficial to the public cause, more especially in their own peninsula, where a great want of concord existed between the Portuguese and the Spaniards. The society was accordingly founded. Several members of the Cortes formed part of it, as well as General Ballesteros, Counselor of State. I still preserve the regulations of this society, the great object of which was to open a communication between the most enlightened patriots of the different cities in Europe. It was decided that I should exert myself to give it extension in Lisbon, London, and Paris, and that in the event of my success, other members should proceed to propagate it over Italy and Germany. Having organized in Madrid the first circle of the Constitutional Society of European Patriots, Pepe proceeded to Lisbon, where he was even more successful in his efforts than in the Spanish capital. 2 of the ministers and several councillors of state and members of the Cortes signified their adhesion, and before Pepe left, a flourishing circle was formed under the direction of Almeida Moras, the president of the Cortes. From Lisbon, the general proceeded by sea to London, where, as he says, he soon found that a secret society in England among men of mind is a thing quite out of the order of probability. He mentioned the society to a few, but met with no encouragement. The Duke of Sussex and Sir Robert Wilson read the statutes and regulations of the society, but only as a matter of curiosity. This curiosity is doubtless is doubtless responsible for the creation of what was later known as the International Committee of London. The particular Duke of Sussex here referred to was Grand Master of the Grand Lodge of England from 1813 to 1843, and this interview with the Italian revolutionary is of great significance, showing as it does the effort at this date to subvert English Freemasonry to the aims of the International. According to the system which worked out later, English Freemasonry retained, to all appearances, its original autonomy. But to proceed with the statement of Frost, Pepy next opened a correspondence with Lafayette, who hailed the proposed international organization of the secret societies as a holy alliance opposed to that of despotism, and at once associated himself with it. He, with Manuel and Argenson, the triumvirate that was supposed to have directed the Associated Patriots of 1816, were earnestly engaged at that time in the reorganization of the Cabaroni of France upon a new system which promised more perfect impenetrability, and Buonarroti was similarly engaged at Geneva with a view to renewed operations in Italy. It has been doubted whether Lafayette, Manuel, and Argenson, with others who were supposed to be the leaders of the Cabaroni in France, were actually the chiefs of the society, and with regard to Manuel at least, the point is not susceptible of positive demonstration. There are in all countries men of superior station who, when a collision between the people and the government is impending, are aware of what is going on, and holds themselves prepared to step to the front when the movement has advanced to a point at which they can do so with advantage to the cause and safety to themselves, but who take care not to commit themselves to it prematurely, or to allow any trace to exist of their connection with it. This has been thought by some to have been the real position of the individuals whom others have asserted to have been the actual leaders of the Cabaroni, as they had previously been held to be of the Associated Patriots, but though there is no absolute proof that there were the grand elect, there can be very little, if any, moral doubt upon the point. The author of Secret Societies of the European Revolution writes the foregoing paragraph but fails to explain it. Who and what are the men he refers to? Such indeed are the political principles adopted by the leaders of Freemasonry. Therein lies its power. As soon as any political movement becomes inevitable, as soon as public pressure on an existing government becomes too strong, the sect, in the name of liberty, equality, and fraternity, takes the secret leadership of the opposing faction. Though the new government, which becomes the subservient tool of its capricious master, who at any moment may suppress its fledgling by creating and backing a new opposition, it holds not the balance of power, but all the power. Thus, those who rule Freemasonry today rule the world. And Frost further adds, in 1831, the French government had not only proclaimed a policy of non-intervention, but had had expressly declared that France would not permit intervention on the part of any other power in the affairs of any nation in Europe. Lafayette was deceived by these professions and assured Misley, the agent of the Masonic Revolutionary Committee, that the Italians had nothing to fear. In that year, Masonry made an attempt to cast off the Austrian yoke in Italy by using France as its base of operations. Owing, however, to French non-cooperation, the revolution failed. A few days afterwards, Misley and Linetti arrived at Marseilles and chartered a vessel, aboard which they put a couple of cannon and 1,200 muskets. They were joined by General Pepy, Count Grillozzoni, the advocate Manitovoni, Dr. Franconcini, and Lieutenant Maury. But at the last moment, the prefect received a telegraphic order from Paris to prevent their embarkation and lay an embargo on the vessel. General Pepy evaded the vigilance of the police, however, and contrived to reach Hyères, where he heard of the entrance of the Austrians into Boulogne. and thereupon abandoned his intention of giving the aid of his reputation and experience to the revolutionary cause. In connection with the agitation provoked in Piedmont during the reign of Charles Albert by Mazzini's Young Italy movement in 1848, the veteran General Pepe again comes into prominence. On March 29, 1848, he arrived at Naples and was sent for by King Ferdinand, who invited him to form a ministry of which he should have the presidency with the ministries of war and marine. Every difficulty, however, was thrown in the way of Pepe's projected military operations, the Naval Department insisting that the fleet could not convey troops, the king interposing various delays, and the Pope refusing permission for more than one battalion or squadron to pass daily. 17,000 troops at last started, but with orders not to cross the Po until the king commanded the passage. There was much marching and countermarching, but the secret societies had not yet won. The tangled history of the Young Italy movement in its early stages is well explained by Thomas Frost in Secret Societies of the European Revolution, and anyone particularly interested in that phase of political history would do well to refer to this book. Due allowance must, however, be made for certain omissions and inaccurate deductions on the part of the author who, in 1876, could not have access to the information which is now available to anyone seeking it. Chapter 30, Albert Pike and Giuseppe Mazzini. This chapter is compiled largely of extracts, some transcribed verbatim and others elaborated to include information necessary to the reader, from Andreolemi by Domingo Morgiata, 33rd degree. Macquarie Pradig by Paul Rosen, 33rd degree. Initiation Human and Solar by Alice A. Bailey, and Le Diable Awe, 29, Sickle by Dr. Bataille. Whatever. Adreno wrote, the anniversary of September 20th, the day on which Rome became the capital of Italy when the temporal power of the Pope was overthrown, concerns Freemasonry exclusively. It is an anniversary, a purely Masonic festival, which marks the date of the arrival of Italian Freemasonry in Rome, the aim of which it had for many years been striving. The date of September 20th, 1870 is not only an Italian date, it is above all a great Masonic date, for it marks the organization of a supreme right introduced into Freemasonry to lend a satanic character to the vague divinity more or less well known by the name of the great architect of the universe. During the last years preceding the capture of Rome, Mazzini had established relations with the Masonic chief of Scottish Rites, Albert Pike, president of the Supreme Council of Charleston, United States. Pike was a great student of the Kabbalah and the occult. Mazzini had understood that Freemasonry was a powerful lever with which to revolutionize the world. But he saw it divided into numerous rites, often rivals and even hostile to one another, aspiring to Italian unity as a means of breaking the temporal power of the Holy See. He dreamt of a union of Masonry throughout the world to destroy the church itself as a spiritual power. He addressed himself to Pike in preference to another Grand Orient of Supreme Council chief because of the many international ramifications of ancient and accepted Scottish rites, as Pike, its recognized chief, had succeeded in gaining considerable influence over all the supreme national councils of this rite, which had hitherto been of a purely dogmatic and lethargic character. Mazzini, who was very practical, said that it would be inadvisable to favor one rite only to the exclusion of all the others. In a letter to Albert Pike dated January 22, 1870, he writes, He must allow all the federations to continue just as they are, with their systems, their central authorities, and their diverse modes of correspondence between the high grades of the same right organized as they are at present, but we must create a supreme right which will remain unknown, to which we will call those Masons of high degree, whom we shall select with regard to their brothers in Masonry. These men must be pledged to the strictest secrecy. Though this supreme right will govern all Freemasonry, which will become the one international center, the more powerful because its direction will be unknown. Thus, at the time when Manzini formed the scheme of unifying Freemasonry by creating one central universal direction reserved to all small number of high Masons chosen with the greatest care, he selected Albert Pike as an ally. Fuck, I want to say something because I want... No. Pike was born in Boston on December 29, 1809. His parents, in modest circumstances, succeeded in giving him a course at Harvard College. He then went to join his family at Newburyport. There, for a while, he taught in a primary school till he moved to Fairhaven, where he continued his career of pedagogue. It wasn't for this reading. It had nothing to do with it. It was on a different level, plane. I wanted to say something, but I won't because I'm working out fucking details here. Yeah, if you're watching and you don't know what the fuck's going on, too goddamn bad. In 1833, he went to Little Rock. From 1830 to 1840, Masonry in the United States had fallen into disrepute and almost ceased to exist. After the torture and death of William Morgan in 1826, many lodges faded into oblivion. If someone is watching, though, they could fucking say, hey, dude, you had a fucking thought back there. But it's okay. I would never expect anyone to actually do anything. William Morgan in 1826, many lodges faded into oblivion to resuscitate only after the storm of public censure had abated. During the Civil War, Pike served as Brigadier General in the Confederate Army. The Confederate government named him Indian Commissioner and charged him with the conduct of negotiations with the most powerful savage tribes to raise an army of their warriors. To facilitate his organization of this army, he was made governor of Indian Territory. And once these hordes were united, they were placed under his command. What followed can be easily understood, as his troops were composed of Chickasaws, Comanches, Creeks, Cherokees, Miamis, Osages, Kansas, and Choctaws, with all whom he personally was on the best of terms. Among them, he was known as the faithful, pale-faced friend and protector. It was no longer war. It was an orgy of murder and atrocity so terrible that the foreign powers interfered. Representations made by England threatening intervention in the name of humanity finally compelled Jefferson Davis to disband his auxiliary Indian troops. Mrs. Liliana Pike Room gives us the following chronological history of her father's early Masonic career. She says that he became an odd fellow sometime in the 40s and in 1850 entered the Masonic fraternity. After that, he gradually ceased to be active as an odd fellow. Soon becoming prominent in Masonry, he advanced rapidly to the highest honors. His Masonic record is as follows. He was initiated in Western Star Lodge at Little Rock, Arkansas, 1850. Raised to the degree of Worshipful Master in Western Star Lodge No. 1, Little Rock, Arkansas, in July 1850. He became charter member of Magnolia Lodge No. 60, Little Rock, Arkansas, and was Worshipful Madam Ada Vitam at the lodge in 1853. Exalted in the Union Chapter No. 2, Ram, Little Rock, Arkansas, 1850. Greeted as Royal and Select Master of Washington, D.C., 1852. Created Knight Templar. Created Knight Templar, 1858, Washington Commanding, No. 1, Kitay in Washington. So, elected Grand High Priest of the Grand Chapter of Arkansas, 1853. In 1856, met Brother Theodore S. Parvin of Connecticut and received degrees of AA, Ancient and Accepted Scottish Rite, from 4th degree to 32nd degree, inclusive, on March 20th, 1853. Cornetted Honorary Inspector. How many fucking... Professional. Cornetted Honorary Inspector General, April 25th, 1857. Crowned active member of Supreme Council, Southern Jurisdiction, March 20th, 1858, at Charleston, South Carolina. And on the resignation of Brother John Honor as Grand Commander, was elected MP Sovereign Grand Commander of the Supreme Council for the Southern Jurisdiction of the United States, January 2nd, 1859. Mrs. Room, further adds, I will state here what he told me himself, that Sovereign Grand Commander Honor, his predecessor, resigned that office expressly that he might be elected Sovereign Grand Commander. As Secretary of the Supreme Council at Charleston at this time, and its ruling power was Pike's great find, Gallatin Mackay. On the other hand, Margiotta gives the following particulars. Towards this epoch, Pike and Mackay received the visit of Longfellow. This Longfellow was a Scottish Rites Mason who, in 1837, had taken up his residence in the United States, becoming the intimate friend and private secretary of Moses Holbrook, then Sovereign Commander of the Supreme Council of Charleston. The intimacy between Longfellow and Holbrook became quickly serious, as both had thoroughly studied the occult sciences and enjoyed discussing the mysteries of the Kabbalah. When Longfellow asked his Grand Master's permission to join the Order of the Oddfellows for the purpose of studying its organization, his request was granted. Oddfellow is the name adopted by the members of a society founded in London towards 1788. Their meeting places were called lodges, as in Masonry, and many were dissolved under the suspicion that their character was subversive, though the visible aims of the fraternity were simply mutual help and diversion. But the society, changing its location and its name, continued to precarious existence till 1809. Several members founded a new lodge at Manchester. Then some of them separated in 1813 and formed the Independent Order of Oddfellows, the IOOF. The members of the General Council, of which were all to reside at Manchester. The order was introduced in America in 1819 by the blacksmith Thomas Wildley, who founded Washington Lodge No. 1 in Baltimore. His town became the headquarters of the American and Canadian Oddfellows, and thanks to the energy of Wildley, the order made great headway and spread with rapidity. Longfellow and Holbrook, while exchanging views on the Kabbalah, had formed the project of creating a satanic rite in which the adepts would be instructed in black magic. But Holbrook, the Grand Master of the Supreme Council of Charleston, who had already composed a suitable ritual and sacrilegious mass called Adonai Mass, died, retarding the fulfillment of the project. He was succeeded by John Honor, after whose death the dream of the Jew Moses Holbrook to subvert Masonry was fulfilled by Albert Pike on a gigantic scale. Holy shit! Longfellow left Charleston after the death of his patron and 1854 went to Hamilton, Canada. There, with the authorization of Wildley, he submitted the rituals of Holbrook to this flourishing society, and it was decided to graft a second and separate class of adepts practicing secret Satanism onto the original body, but Wildley, becoming suddenly jealous, refused the use of his premises. Undiscouraged by obstacles placed in his way by Wildley, Longfellow returned to Charleston in 1857, where he had interviews with Pike and Mackay, to whom he revealed his plan. The innovation of Longfellow was declared to be marvelous, but Pike, who had himself already thought of introducing Luciferianism into the inner shrines of Scottish Rites Freemasonry, would not take a definite stand, so Longfellow addressed him directly to the Grand Master John Honor. He seemed indifferent to the subject on the grounds that one could not introduce Satanism into the Supreme Council of Scottish Rites without a knowledge of his lieutenant commander, Charles Furman, who was opposed to changes of this kind. Finally, Longfellow obtained from Wildley the authorization secretly to use the Order of the Oddfellows for the initiations of the second class, which was to form an absolutely secret rite and to have its center on Hamilton. Satanism then took the name of Resurgist Optimates, used by the Palladists also, and Longfellow became the Grand Priest of the new evocative magic. As a consequence of the intrigues and maneuvers of some members of the Masonic organization, golly, oh fuck. What do I get myself into? Dude, I don't want to fucking read all this. Hold on. I want coffee. I need a sip of coffee. What the fuck can I do to get some coffee around here? I don't know how to pause. Hey, Jesus. Throw me a fucking bone. I'm kidding. Dude. All right. I'm torn. Hold on. I'll be back. All right, as a consequence of the intrigues and maneuvers of some members of the Masonic organization, office of the Grand Master had become an elected position which was now destined to be fulfilled by the particular member of the fraternity selected by the conspirators. Among these was Gallatin Mackay, a Luciferian who proposed Albert Pike, another Luciferian, for the post of Grand Master of the Supreme Council of Charleston, to which he was duly elected January 6th, 1859, his candidacy being unopposed. Margiotta adds, once Grand Master Pike reestablished the supremacy of his Supreme Council and succeeded, gradually becoming an important Masonic personage and the real chief of the Scottish Rites. In 1806, a jeweler, Joseph Carnew, founded a rival rite in New York composed of the same 33rd degrees of initiation as the order of which he himself was chief. This rite, which was later worked by F.F. Fowlhouse, an American, excited the ear of the sovereign pontiff of the Universal Freemasonry, who waged a ceaseless warfare of excommunication against it. From letters scattered through different Masonic archives, it is evident that Mazzini formed his great project after 1866. The Grand Patriarch of the sect in Europe, Lord Palmerston, had died, convinced that the power he had wielded was purely the result of personal influence with the different chiefs, and that not being based on an efficient organization, it was unlikely to endure. Mazzini set himself to study the problem of the International Organization of Freemasonry, and in 1870 reached an agreement with Pike for the creation of the Supreme Rite. The Franco-Prussian War, which enabled the King of Piedmont, already called King of Italy, to take Rome, favored the abolition of the temporal power of the Pope, and at this time the Constitution of the Central High Masonry was decreed and signed between Albert Pike and Giuseppe Mazzini. The act of creation is dated September 20th, 1870, the day upon which the army of invasion commanded by the Freemason General Cardona entered the Eternal City. The two founders divided their powers according to the following plan. To Pike was given dogmatic authority and the title of Sovereign Pontiff of Universal Freemasonry, while Mazzini held the executive authority with the title of Sovereign Chief of Political Action. Mazzini evinced great deferences towards the views of the Patriarchs of Charleston and begged him to draw up the statutes of the grades of the Supreme Secret Rite, which would thus be the liturgic bonds of the members of centralized high Masonry. Albert Pike, in honor of his Templar Baphomet, which was in the keeping of his first and historic Supreme Council, named the order the New and Reformed Paladin Rite, or New and Reformed Palladum. It was agreed, continued Margiotta, that the existence of this rite would be kept strictly secret and that no mention of it would ever be made in the assemblies of the lodges and inner shrines of the rites, even when by accident the meeting might happen to be composed exclusively of brothers having the perfect initiation for the secret of the law. No, for the secret of the new institution was only to be divulged with the greatest caution to a chosen few belonging to the ordinary high grades. To recruit adepts, they planned to use some members of the other rites, but in the beginning they meant to rely principally on those among the initiates of ancient and accepted Scottish rites who were already addicted to occultism. Everyone knows that in Masonry, from the degree of master, a Mason may, without being a member of a lodge, assist at sessions as a visitor at lodges not belonging to his own right or even to his own national federation, providing he is a regular active Mason and presents himself at the lodge working at a degree equal to or below the highest degree of which he is possessed. Thus, a Ross Croix, 18th degree Scottish rites, traveling in any country may, if he frequents assiduously his lodge and chapter, present himself at any lodge of a degree equal to or inferior to his own and assist at a seance. But he cannot enter an areopagus of Knights Kadosh, 30th degree, even one of his own right, a 33rd degree. A 33rd would be well received everywhere, in any country, in any rite, the existence of which is acknowledged. Thus, it was particularly the initiates of the 33rd degree Scottish rites who, owing to their extensive international ramifications, were privileged to recruit adepts for palladism. That is why the Supreme Rite created its triangles, the name given to paladin lodges by degrees, but these were established on a firm base, the lowliest of its initiates being brothers long tested in ordinary masonry. One will better understand these precautions knowing that palladism is essentially a Luciferian rite. Its religion is Manichaean neo-Gnosticism, teaching that divinity is dual and that Lucifer is the equal of Adonai, with Lucifer, the god of light and goodness, struggling for humanity against Adonai, the god of darkness and evil. In stating this principle of the secret cult of the triangles, Albert Pike had only specified in unveiling the dogmas of the high grades of all other masonry, for in no matter what rite, the great architect of the universe is not the God worshipped by the Christians. For other reasons, these precautions were still necessary in order to render possible the exercise of supreme central directing power, reaching all the rites through the personal influence of the elects and perfect initiates, these being invested with privileges and giving the impulse which emanated from the source of the highest universal authority. If brothers not fully initiated had suspected the existence of supreme organization, it is evident that in the ordinary lodges there would always have been a tendency to resist the motions of such privileged persons. To ensure the creation and good working of this formidable machine of palladism, Mazzini had reserved for himself the office of Chief of Political Action, nor had he hesitated in bowing to the will of the Patriarch of Charleston, who, by his preponderance on Scottish rites, could easily penetrate all countries of the globe. With the newest institution, that is the reason for Mazzini giving supremacy to the dogmatic over the political authority in international Freemasonry. The Holy See, spelled S-E-E, of the dogma for the whole Masonic world was set up at Charleston, the sacred city of the Palladum. Pike, the sovereign pontiff of Lucifer, was the president of the Supreme Dogmatic Directory, composed of 10 brothers of the highest grades who formed a Supreme Grand Lodge of Emeritus Masons. The sovereign executive directory of the High Masonry was established at Rome under Mazzini himself, who, knowing the rivalry between the different Supreme Councils in Italy, seldom appeared at the official meetings of the Grand Orient of Rome. And so as not to awaken suspicion in the minds of ordinary high-grade Italian Masons in whom he had not confided the secret of the new institution, pretended to be occupied with socialism only. But, nope, what was this interest, plan, or pretense? It actually says rut, not but. I don't know if it's supposed to be but or rut, but rut sounds funnier. Rut was this interest, plan, or pretense. And no, I'm not talking like a fucking Cartman, because that shit's old and played out. In the following paragraph of the International in World Revolution by N. Webster, page 179, we find a link, if not the link between Mazzini and Karl Marx, Mazzini and his International Masons are already preparing the subversion of the socialist labor movement. At the meeting of St. Martin's Hall on September 28, 1864, when the International was definitely founded, Marx played no part at all. I was present, he wrote Engels. Only as a dumb personage on the platform, Rut. Okay, so it was Rut. I thought it was but it was Rut. Rut, he was named, nevertheless, a member of the subcommittee, the other members being Mazzini's secretary, a Polish Jew named Wolf. Lubitz, a French Freemason, Kramer, the secretary of the English Masons Union, and Weston, the Owenite. At the first meeting of this committee, Wolf placed before it the statutes of Mazzini's Working Men's Association, proposing them as the basis of the new association. Lubitz suggested amendments describe our Marx as perfectly churlish. I was firmly resolved, he wrote, not to leave a single line, if possible, of all the balderdash. In a few weeks, he had succeeded in establishing his authority. My propositions were all accepted by the commission. As to whether Marx thus maneuvered himself into a dominant position in the movement, or Mazzini's agents maneuvered Marx into the position to suit their own ends, is left to our imagination. But the fact of someone not an outstanding personality being elected or nominated on a committee for no particular reason generally means, to anyone versed in the technique of political tricks, that the nomination of election was something arranged behind the scenes. On page 46 in La Theologie Politique de Mazzini et Internationale Bakunin, the celebrated Russian anarchist refutes certain statements said to have been current in London about himself at the time in the following terms. This must be about Bakunin. But in 1864, while on my way through London, he, Karl Marx, came to see me and assured me that he, Mazzini, had never taken any part, directed or indirect, in these calumnies against me, which he himself had considered most infamous. I had to believe. It is a fact that for a certain length of time, Mazzini and Marx were closely associated. An eminent Mason, the atheist leader of the Italian socialists, Alberto Mario, husband of Miss Jessie White, an ardent Mazzinian, and the authoress of the history of her hero, Della Vita de Giuseppe Mazzini, was moreover a tool of Pike, whom he generally consulted on all important matters. Thus, in order to divert the attention of the imperfect initiates, Mazzini organized a Congress of Working Men in Rome in October 1871. A close examination of the work of this Congress shows, however, that it was only pretense, for nothing practical was attempted or accomplished. On the other hand, he busied himself with grouping all the political elements of the sect, in which occult maneuver his agent, Ardonio Lemmy, helped him more than anyone else. When Pike sent him a copy of his Luciferian rituals, Mazzini was full of an enthusiastic praise for his colleague's work, which he expressed in his articles La Roma del Popolo. The public, however, failed to understand the sentiment that inspired him to proclaim the existence of a divinity and denounce materialism and atheism. One was puzzled to find this man a mystic. He showed himself extremely religious, yet he declared himself the sworn enemy of the church. Pike's literary achievements were numerous. These were Ariel, Morals and Dogma, the Sacred Hymns, the Sefer Devarim, Book of the World, Legenda Magistralia, Ritual of the New and Reformed Paddleism, 4th grades out of 5, the Book of Revelations, the Supreme Verb, the Ritual of Elect Magus, and the Book of Adapino, which later contains the prophecies concerning the reign of the Antichrist from the satanic point of view. The theological dogma of Albert Pike is explained in the instructions issued by him on July 14, 1889, to the 23rd Supreme Councils of the World, and have been recorded by A.C. de la Rive in La Femme Elephant de la France Universal, page 588, from which book we translate and quote as follows. That which we must say to the crowd is, we worship a God, but it is the God that one adores without superstition. To you, Sovereign Grand Inspectors General, we say this, that you may repeat it to the brethren of the 32nd, 31st, and 30 degrees. The Masonic religion should be, by all of us initiates of the high degrees, maintained in the purity of the Luciferian doctrine. If Lucifer were not God, would Adonai, the God of the Christians, whose deeds prove his credulity, perfidy, and hatred of man, barbarism, and repulsion of science, would Adonai and his priests culminate him? Yes, Lucifer is God, and unfortunately Adonai is also God. Damn, dude, these guys are fucking nuts. I love this shit. For the eternal law is that there is no light without shade, and no beauty without ugliness, no white without black, for the absolute can only exist as two gods, darkness being necessary to light and to serve as its foil, as the pedestal is necessary to the statue, and the brake to the locomotive. God, dude, this is insane. I don't know if I can be professional reading this. This is insane. Oh, it's too much. It's too much for today. It's awesome. All right. Not that Lucifer is God. It's not what I'm all like, oh, no, that's not what I'm in That's not what I'm awesome about. I'll be back to this book. All right, here we go. I got to finish this one, though. Got to see what this dude was up to. Where was I? All right. If Lucifer were not God, would Adonai, the God of the Christians, whose deeds prove his credulity, perfidy, and hatred of men, barbarism, and repulsion of science, would Adonai and his priests culminate him? Yes, Lucifer is God. Unfortunately, Adonai is also God. For the eternal law is that there is no light without shade, no beauty without ugliness, no white without black. For the absolute can only exist as two gods, darkness being necessary to light, as to serve as its foil, as the pedestal is necessary to the statue, and the brake to the locomotive. In analogical and universal dynamics, one can only lean on that which will resist. Thus, the universe is balanced by two forces within which maintain its equilibrium, the force of attraction and that of repulsion. These two forces exist in physics, philosophy, and religion, and the scientific reality of the divine dualism is demonstrated by the phenomena of polarity and by the universal law of sympathies and antipathies. That is why the intelligent disciples of Zoroaster, as well as, after them, the Gnostics, the Manichaeans, and the Templars, have admitted as the only logical metaphysical conception the system of the two divine principles fighting eternally, and one cannot believe the one inferior in power to the other. Thus, the doctrine of Satanism is a heresy, and the true and pure philosophic religion is the belief of Lucifer and the equal of Adonai. But Lucifer, God of light and God of good, is struggling for humanity against Adonai, the God of darkness and evil. One must not lose sight of the fact that Pike occupied simultaneously the positions of Grand Master of the Central Directory of Washington, that of the Grand Commander of the Supreme Council of Charleston, and that of the Sovereign Pontiff of Universal Freemasonry. In 1880, a charter was granted him by the Royal Order of Scotland for the foundation of lodges in America, appointing him Provincial Grand Master of the Order of HRM. He was indeed a great organizer. Margiotta further writes, the two chief priests, Pike and Mazzini, finally completed the organization of high masonry, establishing the grand central directories for the world, functioning thenceforth to gather information for the benefit of their political policy and the dogmatic propaganda. These were the grand central directories for North America at Washington, for South America at Montevideo, for Europe at Naples, and for Asia and Oceania at Calcutta. Later, a central subdirectory for Africa was founded at Port Louis, Islands of Mauritius, and after the death of Mazzini, the supreme chief constituted a universal sovereign administrative directory at Berlin, which ranked in the hierarchy after the sovereign executive directories and before the four great central directories. Gallatin Mackey, the confidant of Albert Pike, died in Charleston on June 20th, 1881. He was the author of many works on Masonry, namely the Lexicon of Freemasonry, published in New York in 1845, The History of Freemasonry in South Carolina, the Manual of the Lodge, The Masonic Ritualist, The Symbolism of Freemasonry, and the Encyclopedia of Freemasonry, the authorship of which is generally now attributed to Albert George Mackey. According to the fundamental constitution of the Paladin, the nomination of the chief of political action, the president of the sovereign executive directory, was not an elective office. Its incumbent was an appointee of the sovereign pontiff of universal Freemasonry. When Mazzini felt himself to be dying, he designated Andrea Lemmy as his successor. He died on March 11th, 1872 at Pisa and Albert Pike, deferring to his wishes, named Adriano Lemmy as his successor. Pike was not only an organizer and a politician, he was also, in his religious capacity, a Kabbalist and spiritualist, a mystic on whose personality the following antidote sheds a flood of light. Speaking before the Supreme Council of Charleston on October 20th, 1884, he gave an account of his recent travels through the United States and some incidental experiences. One of these he described as follows. At St. Louis, we operated the Grand Rites, and through Sister Ingersoll, who is a first-class medium, received astonishing revelations during a Psalm Paladin session at which I presided, assisted by Brother Friedman and Sister Warnburn. Without putting Sister Ingersoll to sleep, we saturated her with the spirit of Ariel himself, but Ariel took possession of her with 329 more spirits of fire, and the seance from then on was marvelous. Sister Ingersoll lifted into space, floated over the assembly, and her garments were suddenly devoured by a flame which enfolded without burning her. We saw her thus in a state of nudity for over 10 minutes, flitting above our heads as though borne by an invisible cloud or upheld by a beneficent spirit. She answered all questions put to her. We thus soon had the latest news of our very illustrious brother, Andrea Lemmy. Then Astaroth in person revealed himself, flying beside her medium and holding her hand. He breathed upon her and her clothes, returning from nowhere, clothed her again. Finally, Astaroth vanished, and her sister fell gently onto a chair where, with her head down back, she gave up Ariel and the 329 spirits who had accompanied her. We counted 330 exaltations in all at the end of this most successful experiment. The number of books of this period refer to what must have been a wireless telephone in the possession of the heads of the Masonic organization. A translation of the detailed description of this instrument given in Barthel's book is quoted herewith as being of interest in these days when magic sometimes becomes experimental science. At the date on which this description was first printed, 1894, wireless was unknown. In his house, Gallatin Mackey once showed me that Arcula Mystica, the mystic box, of which there are only 7 examples in existence at Charleston, Bourne, Berlin, Washington, Montevideo, Naples, and Calcutta. The exterior of the small box resembles a liquor's receptacle. A spring catch opens simultaneously its 2 doors and lid. Inside, in the middle, stands a telephone mouthpiece in silver, which at first sight one would take for a very small trumpet or hunting horn. At the left is a little rope made of twisted silver threads, one end of which is attached to the machine, while other extremity ends in a kind of little bell which one holds to one's ear to hear the voice of the person with whom one is speaking, just like the telephone of today. At the right is a toad in silver with its mouth open. Placed around the opening of the mouthpiece stand 7 statuettes in gold, each one a small separate silver pedestal representing symbolically the 7 cardinal virtues of the Paladin ladder. Each of these 7 statuettes designates one of the directories. The statuettes Ignis, Sacred Fire, Divine Endeavor stands for the Supreme Dogmatic Directory of Charleston. Ratio, Reason, Triumphant over Superstition. The Sovereign Executive Directory of Rome. Labor, the Sovereign Administrative Directory of Berlin. Uberus, Fecundity, Caritas, Masonic Charity. Emancipatio, the emancipation of humanity, shedding the yoke of all despotisms, and Felicitas, happiness derived from virtuous practices, representing the 4 grand central directories of Washington, Naples, Montevideo, and Calcutta. When the supreme dogmatical chief wishes to communicate, for example, with the head of a political action, he presses his finger on the statuette ignis and on the statue ratio. These sink into their sockets, and at the same instant, a strong whistling is heard in Rome. In the office where Lemmy keeps his Arcula Mystica, Lemmy opens his box and sees the statuette of Ignis sunk, while tiny, harmless flames issue from the throat of the silver toad. Then he knows that the sovereign pontiff of Charleston wishes to speak to him. He presses down the statuette of Ratio in his box, and from then on, the conversation between the two chiefs proceeds, each one speaking directly into the mouthpiece described above, while at the same time holding to his ear the small silver bell. At the end of the conversation, each chief replaces the golden statuettes by pulling them up by the head. Every sovereign grand master of a directory travels with his Arcula Mystica. The box is personally confided to him. Wow. That of the administrative directory of Berlin is kept by the sovereign finance delegate, who is actually Blechroder, 1893. It is evidently necessary to detach the memory of Albert Pike from the great number of exaggerated legends which cling to his name, but with a man of this type, one never knows just what to think. His reputation as an occultist had overstepped the doors of the lodges and inner shrines. Everyone knew from heresy that he gave himself up to Luciferian practices. Wow. Owing to the discredit cast upon Batilla's writings, we now know the corroboration of the existence of such rites as described above from the well-known Theosophist Mrs. Alice A. Bailey's book, Initium Human and Solar, published 1922 by the Lucifer Publishing Company, New York City, which has never been challenged. Such quotations touch upon the following subjects: description of the deity, description of initiation of fire, description of sex and fire, description of the seven rays. Whoo! Yeah, man. Yeah. I'm going to be able to read for probably another 5 minutes, but this is... wow. I don't know what to say. Interesting. It's just interesting. I don't know how to even explain it. I'll continue on, but man, it's just interesting. I don't know how to put it. I don't know if it's good or bad or what, but yeah, it's deep. I'll give you that much. 1. The Lord of the world, the one initiator, he who is called in the Bible the Ancient of Days and in the Hindu scriptures the first Kamara. He, Sanat Kamara, it is, from his throne in Shambhala in the Gobi Desert, presides over the Lodge of Masters and holds in his hands the reins of government in all the 3 departments, called in some scriptures the Great Sacrifice. He is chosen to watch over the evolution of men and devas until all have been occultly saved. He is who 4 times a year meets in conference with the Kahons and Masters and authorizes what shall be done to further the ends of evolution. Call it Lucifer, call it Satan, or the devil. It is always the same old manifestation, revamped now as Sanat Kamara, and while he may indeed seem to be a very good God, his presence alone is our only concern at the moment. 2. As to the initiation, the Hierophant utters the word, and the force is literally thrown into the initiate's bodies and centuries, passing down through the centuries on the mental plane via the astral centers to the centers of the etheric levels, which finally absorb it. This is the stupendous moment for the initiate and brings to him a realization of the literal absolute truth of the phrase that God is a consuming fire. He knows past all gainsaying that fire energy, his electric force, constitute the sum total of all that is. He is literally bathed in the fires of purification. He sees fire on all sides pouring out through the rod of initiation, circulating around the triangle and passing through the bodies of the 2 sponsoring adepts. For a brief second, the entire lodge of masters and initiates, standing in their ceremonial places without the triangle, are hidden from view by a wall of fire. The initiate sees no one save the Hierophant and is aware of nothing but a fiery blaze of pure blue-white flame which burns but destroys not, which intensifies the activity of every atom in his body without disintegrating, and which purifies his entire nature. Yikes, the fire tries his work of what sort it is, and he passes through the flame. At the fifth initiation, the great secret which concerns the fire or spirit aspect is revealed to the wondering and amazed master. He realizes, in a sense of incomprehensible to the man, the fact that all is fire and fire is all. Damn, dude. Let the disciple transfer the fire from the lower triangle to the higher and preserve that which is created through the fire of the midway point. This means literally the control by the initiate of the sex impulse is usually understood, and the transference of the fire, which now normally vitalizes generative organs, to the throat center, thus leading to creation upon the mental plane through the agency of mind. Okay. 4. As to the seven rays, grouped of egos are formed according to the ray, 2, according to their sub-ray, 3, according to their rate of vibration. They are also grouped for purposes of classification. 1, as egos according to their egoic ray, 2, as personalities according to the sub-ray, which is governing the personality. All are graded and charted. The masters have their halls of records, with a system of tabulation incomprehensible to us owing to its magnitude and its necessary intricacies, wherein these charts are kept. They are under the care of Cohen of a ray, each ray having its own collection of charts. These halls of records are mostly on the lowest levels of the mental plane and the highest of the astral, as they can be there most fully utilized and are most easily accessible. While the ray business may be an excellent scientific, though little known method of keeping in touch with the adepts, it has one very serious disadvantage, namely that whoever is attuned to a ray is, in case of revenge or evil intent on the part of a superior, shall we say scientist, vulnerable on this ray. One is almost astonished at the frankness displayed by Mr. Bailey in her revelations concerning the secrets of initiation. When one remembers the tragic fate of William Morgan, the secret condemnation, kidnapping and sequester and torture and final assassination of this New York journalist who had published for the profane public the principal Masonic rituals of the period. Carlyle, in his Manual of Freemasonry, gives following particulars. My exposure of Freemasonry in 1825 led to the exposure in the United States of America, and a Mason there of the name William Morgan, having announced his intention of assisting in the work of exposure, was kidnapped under pretending forms and warrants of law by his brother Masons, removed from the state of New York to the borders of Canada near the Falls of Niagara, and there most barbarously murdered. This happened in 1826. The states have been for many years much excited upon the subject. A regular warfare has arisen between Masons and anti-Masons. Societies of anti-Masons have been formed, newspapers and magazines started, many pamphlets and volumes, with much correspondence published, so that before the slavery question was passed amongst them, all parties had merged themselves into Masons and anti-Masons. Several persons were punished for the abduction of Morgan, but the murderers were sheltered by Masonic lodges and rescued from justice. The story of the murder of William Morgan for the crime of violating Masonic secrecy has long been a well-known historical fact, but in August 1875, the full particulars were brought to light by the publication of 2 letters from the Venerable Thurlow Weed. The facts were as follows. How much time I got? I'll go another page. In the year 1826, Morgan, who had passed through all the degrees of Freemasonry and held a very high position in the order, conceived the idea of publishing a book disclosing all the secrets of the sect. What his motive may have been is only conjectural. Mr. Weed was living at that time in the town of Rochester, New York, and Morgan requested him to publish the projected book. Mr. Weed declined, and Morgan went to the adjoining town of Botvia, where he arranged with another person for the publication. He had written a portion of the book and was engaged in completing it when he was arrested on the false charge of larceny. On the 10th of September, conveyed to the jail on Ontario. of Ontario County. The sheriff and officers of this person were Masons. His house was searched and his manuscripts were seized and destroyed. On the evening of the 12th September, he was discharged by the interference of some of the conspirators, and as he passed out of the door of the jail, was seized by them, taken a short distance, and then forcibly put into a carriage. He was carried in the course of that night on to the road ridge about 2 miles beyond the village of Rochester. During the next day, he was taken to Lewiston, a distance of 70 or 80 miles, and from thence to Fort Nigeria at the mouth of the Nigerian River. His benevolent captors had decided on bringing him here in the hope that their brother Masons of Canada would aid them in disposing of him. His murder was not then contemplated, but it was hoped that the Canadian Masons would take charge of him and send him to end his days among the Indian tribes in the northwest of Canada. Placing their prisoner in Fort Niagara, his captors crossed the river into Canada to attend a meeting of a lodge there, but the Canadian Masons, after much deliberation, refused to become parties to the business. The American Masons returned to Fort Niagara, and in a few days afterwards, a large number of men high in the order assembled a short distance off to open an encampment of Knights Templars. The additional power of the sealed obligation being necessary for such a case. At night they dined together, and after dinner the chaplain gave a sentiment too significant that all thoughts were turned towards Fort Niagara. The sentiment was, in fact, death to all traitors, and immediately afterwards one of the company, Colonel King, arose from the table and called 4 of the others to accompany him. These were Whitney, a stonesman, Kubak, a farmer, Gershad, a butcher, and Howard, a bookbinder. They were all, says Mr. Weed, men of correct habits and good character, and all, I doubt not, were moved by the enthusiastic but most misguided sense of duty. King told them that he had an order from the Grand Master, the execution of which required their assistance, and they replied that they would obey it. The 5 murderers were then driven in a carriage to the fort where Morgan was confined. It was just midnight. They told the doomed man that his friends had completed their arrangements for his removal to Canada, where his life would be safe. He consented to go with them, and they walked to the wharf, where a boat was waiting for them. They embarked and rowed away into the darkness. When the boat reached the point where Niagara River empties itself into the Lake Ontario, the murderers threw off all pretense and, with some horrible mummeries, ordered Morgan to prepare for death. They wound a rope around him, attaching to each end of it a heavy weight, and threw him overboard. He sank like a stone, and the murderers returned to tell their comrades that the traitor had met a traitor's doom. One of the murderers, Whitney, told all these particulars to Mr. Weed a few months afterwards, but it is only now, when all the criminals are dead, that he makes the fact public. The body of Morgan was found a year afterwards, identified by his wife and friends, and buried, and although the Masons tried to dispute the identification, their efforts were futile. None of the murderers were ever brought to justice. So much for the oath of secrecy and brotherhood. Nowadays, greater precautions are observed in getting rid of the enemies of the sect. Some little study and the cooperation of a few culpable doctors, its auxiliaries, and affiliates enable the terrible sect to dispose easily of their enemies. The victim of their vengeance, swallowing some disease germ, meets a fate that none can prove to have been artificially contrived. This is the secret of secrets, denied again and again, and yet the charge remains, for plague, cholera, and all epidemics can be let loose on the world at a word from the hidden masters. Oh! Guess they're not fucking around. But to return to the organization of Freemasonry. It is necessary here to say that in many instances where a masculine lodge has a feminine annex, its existence is frequently completely ignored by the majority of the brothers. No mutual visiting is allowed among the female members of the lower Masonic degrees, for a sister may enter lodges other than her own only after she has herself attained the 5th degree, as well as masculine general inspectors on permanent missions in direct communication with Charleston. There are general inspectresses, high-grade women Masons belonging to the ordinary Masonry, who, while not necessarily affiliated with Palladism serve the purpose of its leaders, their good offices being much appreciated when they furnish useful information to headquarters. These women are privileged to enter the lodges and inner shrines of Masonry only, but are not admitted to Paladin triangles. As for men belonging to an adoptive lodge where brothers and sisters work together, they must have at least attained the 32nd Prince of the Royal Secret or a corresponding grade in another rot before they can enter an Areopagus of Sublime Ecosace. I'm going to go one more because that'll end the quote. As regards the position of women in Masonry, we think that this cannot be better explained than in the words of Albert Pike himself in La Femme Elephant dans la Frankenmacaroninerie Universelle, page 578, A.C. Delarive states that on July 14, 1889, Albert Pike, Sovereign Pontiff of the Universal Freemasonry, addressed to the 23rd Supreme Confederate Councils of the world the following instructions, which we quote here with in part. Well, for anyone who wants to know that little nugget, you're going to have to wait, because I got shit to do. It is my Christmas. I'll see you all later. All right, let's see if we can finish this chapter up today. Maybe not. Page 233. With the science of Faust, the real Mason will join the impassibility of Job. He will eradicate superstition from his heart and cultivate decision of character. He will accept pleasure only when he wishes it and will wish it only when he should do so. We earnestly recommend the creation of lodges of adoption. They are indispensable to the formation of Masons who are indeed masters of themselves. The P-Nest, P-N-E-S-T, tries to subdue his flesh by enforced celibacy. The real Mason, on the contrary, reaches perfection, that is to say, achieves self-mastery by using his zeal in the lodges of adoption in submitting to all natural ordeals. Commerce with women belonging to the brethren forms for him an armor against those passions which lead hearts astray. He alone can really possess voluptuousness. To be able at will to use or to abstain is a twofold power. Women fetters thee by the desires. We say to the adept, well, use women often and without passion. Thou wilt thus become a master of thy desires, and thou wilt enchain women, from which it must perforce result that the real Mason will succeed in early solving the problems of the flesh. It is evidently not absolutely necessary that the man whom you are leading towards the high grades be immediately perfect and have understood our secret on his entrance into Masonry. That which we ask you is first to observe him with the greatest care during his apprenticeship, and afterwards, when he enters the lodge of adoption as companion, to use that as your criterion, your instrument of infallible control. The lodge of brothers, which has failed to annex a lodge of sisters, is incomplete and destined inevitably never to produce anything but brethren, with whom politics are the chief concern, men who will be chiefly preoccupied with intrigue and rivalry, who will do bad work, and whose politics will be incoherent. Wow. Dr. Bataille elucidates this point in the following terms. Concerning androgynous lodges, Masons generally give the same answer. They either say, yes, once upon a time there were sister Masons, but there are none any longer, or if forced to make a concession, say lodges admitting women are irregular and function entirely outside the Masonry proper, unrecognized by Grand Orients and Supreme Councils. Having referred to the great care exercised to hide the existence of the sister Masons, it is now opportune to expose the ruse employed in stifling further investigation. From time to time, one of the semi-initiates is urged to bring a resolution suggesting the establishment of feminine lodges, and a petition is drawn up and sent into the Grand Orient of Supreme Council, whereupon the chiefs gravely insert a decree in the official bulletin rejecting the petition, and emphasizing the point that the Constitution is opposed to the creation of regular female lodges. When, however, the question of Sister Masons is raised in the profane press, quick, the Grand Orients and Supreme Councils publish these famous decrees. In certain cities where Masonic secrecy is less carefully guarded, a part of the Masonic premises is available for the use of the profane public in daily lectures on or instructions of the brother professors. In these rooms, every evening, accounting, stenography, foreign languages, and other popular professional accomplishments are taught. A great activity is thus created around Masonic headquarters, and the entrance of the women more or less attracts no attention. The Sister Masons, however, know to which room they must go, and once past the threshold of the building, it is not to the professional lecture room that they wend their way. In the connection with Eastern occultism and its organization, Dr. Patel made the following statement and curious deduction. A number of satanic monasteries are concealed today under the guise of Muslim harems or annexes of Lama or Brahmin monasteries, but it is possible that someday these institutions might take root in Europe, where, under a deceptive exterior, one of these communities might be established. When one knows the true mission of the pink serpents, one wonders if Christianity will not presently assist at the crowning abomination, a covenant of so-called Christians practicing Luciferianism. The pink serpents are Sister Masons. They are the Luciferian missionaries and operate as individuals and under conditions of the greatest secrecy. No records of the money appropriated for these religious spies are shown. But let us resume the subject of palladism as explained by Dr. Patel. This super right, which is Masonic Luciferianism, spiritualism, must not be confused with the machinery of high masonry. Palladism is the cult of Satan in the inner shrines of a rite superposed to ail the rites. It is a cult, a religion. High masonry is a supreme administration involving an organization much more highly developed than palladism, whose secret leaders, some of whom are not Luciferian, act in concert and accept a superior central authority in order that their work may be the more effective. This book reads conjoined, like really weird for me. I like reading it. I really like reading it, but I'm sorry about the mistakes. I'm used to a certain flow, and I don't know why I'm telling you. I just am, So if it sounds disjointed, buy the fucking book and read it yourself. That's about the only way I can put it. Anyway, in founding the new and reformed Paladin Rite, General Pike did not create Masonic occultism. Anderson, Desalegers, Weishaupt, Swedenborg, Lessing, Frederick of Prussia, Mesmer, Pernicki, Calistrio, Martinez Pasqualis, and his disciple St. Martin, Francisca, the director of Paraguay, Lord Palmerston, General Contreras, Mazzini, and many other distinguished Freemasons practice occultism and work at the great work of the Kabbalah. But before the year 1870, the inner shrines all operated without other direction than that of the Lutheric rituals of Swedenborg, St. Martin, Lafon, Landbat, the Victome de la Jonquière, etc., and the Masonic initiates of Hermeticism were widely dispersed in different schools, which were local and not international. While Pike laid the foundation of palladism at Charleston, Mazzini organized the centralization of political action in Rome, and 2 years after the founding of the Sovereign Executive and the Supreme Dogmatic Directories, a third, the Sovereign Administrative Directory, was instituted in Berlin. This latter functioned by means of a constantly renewed committee of 7 taken from the Supreme Councils, Grand Encampments, Grand Orients, and Grand Lodges of the world. By means of an ingeniously contrived system of rotation, these representatives act by virtue of their mandate for 3 months only. Each of the existing rights, with the exception of the Paladin, send annually to Berlin 2 of its members of the superior degrees drawn from any country except Germany, which alone of all those represented is entitled to 1 permanent member whose quarterly term of office expires at the end of the time allotted to the particular lodge of which he is a delegate. The members of the Sovereign Administrative Directory are always given 120 days notice of their appointments in order to enable them to plan what would appear to be a pleasure trip or a holiday, when in fact they are going on the business of the association. 2 special delegates are permanently attached to the Directory of Berlin, 1 for finance and 1 for propaganda. At the present date, 1894, Black Roder fills the first mentioned position in Findel, a non-Luciferian. The second, these officers are obliged to live in Germany and to be in a sufficiently independent position to be able to go to the seat of the directory at a moment's notice. The business of the propaganda agent is to furnish information to the chiefs at Rome and Charleston. He receives monthly by secret messenger from Berlin the report of all measures formulated at the Sovereign Administrative Directory relating to means and methods judged useful by spreading the principles of the association. After a meeting, he examines, coordinates, and frames a report of the decisions upon which 3 months later the 7 members of the Berlin Directory will vote. Of these 7 members, thanks to the system of rotation explained above, there are always at least 2 who, having belonged to the directory at the time of the submission of the resolution under consideration, are able to furnish commentaries and explanations to the newcomers. Only resolutions having obtained a favorable vote of 5 or 7 voices can be registered by the delegate recorder, and these can be finally adopted only on the second following month, if they pass unanimously. In the event of 1 or more persons opposing a measure, the matter is referred to the chief at Rome, after which, failing his approval, it is settled arbitrarily by the chief at Charleston, from whose decision there is no appeal. The business of the financial agent is not a matter of funds. It consists in drawing up a general balance sheet of all rights in all countries, with the brother accountant working under his orders as a sworn expert. As above said, the Paladin right has no share in the functioning of the Sovereign Administrative Directory. This should again prove that Palladism is superimposed to all the other rights. It is the Luciferian religion, and only need concern itself with the triangles, which have a separate budget. Being the real hidden power known only to the perfect initiates, it need not unveil itself even to this permanent committee, which constitutes the highest expression of the administrative power of the great international association. One must also not lose sight of the fact that among the Messianic powers there are several countries where the symbolic Grand Lodges recognize only 3 grades, of which that of master is the 3rd and highest degree. These lodges, like the others, are entitled to send 2 delegates from time to Berlin, and as a consequence of having suppressed the high grades for their adepts, these federations are necessarily kept in complete ignorance of the existence of Palladism. The supreme chiefs of Charleston and Rome appear to them solely as earnest, active brothers who should be consulted because of their great personal experience, but that is all. Finally, the Palladists have no need to be officially represented in Berlin, as most of the members of the Supreme Council's Grand Encampments and Grand Orients are their men, and any important proposition is immediately communicated to them. Under the sovereign directory, the executive at Rome, and the administrative at Berlin, come the grand central directories, which are bureaus of registration in the different parts of the world. These are located in North America, South America, Europe, Asia, and Oceania. There is as well a subdirectory for Africa. At their heads are the high grades entrusted to brothers, by whom everything that emanates from the Supreme Councils, Grand Encampments, Grand Orients, and Grand Lodges of their jurisdiction is centralized. Independent of the Sovereign Administrative Directory of Berlin, they operate directly under the chiefs of Rome and Charleston, and it is by these central directories that these two great intriguers are kept informed of the trend of world affairs. As everything comes to the grand central directories, so everything emanates from them. 5 messengers to Washington, Montevideo, Naples, Calcutta, and Port Louis will put in motion the formidable machinery of Freemasonry the world over. If the organization described in the foregoing pages, which were written by Bataille 40 years ago, has progressed along the lines above indicated, one can easily conjecture the degree of perfection which has doubtless been attained today. All right. Chapter 31, Practical Politics. The game of politics is the pursuit of power. In all democracies, there are 2 separate organizations playing the political game. The open and visible one, the members of which hold office as members of a government, and the invisible one composed of individuals who control this visible organization and in whom is vested the real power, the essence of which is finance controlling the publicity which makes or unmakes its tools. This financial power may be used to promote truth or fallacies, good or evil, national prosperity or national ruin. But so long as human nature is what it is, so long as jealousy, greed, personal ambition, and expediency can sway the lives of men, so long will the rule of the invisible power prevail by methods inimical to the best interests of a nation. The strength of a democracy thus lies at the mercy of invisible leaders who, being nationally irresponsible, cannot be called to account for the consequences of the acts of the government they control. This, at the same time, constitutes the inherent weakness of any form of government, the apostasis of which is the control of both parties in the state, right and left, radical and conservative, by the same forces. Then only the puppets change, while the rule of the individuals controlling the machine continues unhindered. Voters who wonder why their efforts have failed wonder in vain. As the dupes of a controlled publicity, their privilege of the vote is a farce. If all factions in a state can be controlled from one source, why should international control be impracticable? Italy, if one follows its history for the last 100 years, gives a consequence of good illustrations of such possibilities and affords us a chance to follow the progressive stages of Masonic centralization and imposition of internationalism upon nations, as conceived by Mazzini, Pike, Palmerston, and Bismarck. International control was Mazzini's dream. His cynical remark, "We aspire to corrupt in order to rule," leaves one little faith in the idealism of this patriarch of international Freemasonry. That he applied his motto is shown by the use he made of Francesco Crispi. As Palmagimagimi Crispi writes, Crispi became personally acquainted with Mazzini in London in January 1855, but they had corresponded since 1850, when their golden dream of liberty and independence vanished by the return of all the tyranny of the past. The bravest of the patriots had once more begun to conspire. While pondering the idea of founding a national committee in which the various regions of Italy should be represented, Mazzini also determined to form a fund for the carrying out of great enterprises. And as it is impossible to obtain large sums secretly and from a few people, he wrote, he worked out a plan for a national loan to be raised by the issue of bonds to be redeemed by a liberated Italy. The first act of the National Committee was to authorize the issue of such bonds to the amount of 10 million lire. In his youth, Francisco Crispi made a mistake, and blackmail made him a ruler of men. As the tool of Mazzini, he ruled Italy for many years, and as the ruler of Italy, he wielded the secret power of international masonry in accordance with the policy of his masters. According to Crispi, 33rd degree by D. Vaughan, Crispi, an Palladism brother V. Serafino Cicciolio, was born at Ribera in Sicily, October 4th, 1819. His father, Tommaso Crispi, a lawyer, destined him to the church, but in 1837 he married Felicita Val, a pretty young girl with whom he was infatuated. In 1856, he abandoned her for Rosala Montemasson, deserting the latter in 1878 to marry Lina Barbagallo, widow Capellani. At this period, he was openly accused of bigamy, and though challenged to do so, he never produced the documents necessary to prove the death of his first wife, Felicita Val. After his marriage in 1837, he practiced law, and in 1838 joined one of the numerous secret societies which in those days infested Sicily. Presently, he started his career as a political intriguer and conspirator, traveling over the world on his sinister business under different aliases and false passports provided for him by Mazzini, who, in view of his confidential position as friend of the King of Naples, had bought his services as a spy. Domenico Margiolo states in Francisco Crispi, son, ever nefast, that he found among the papers of his grandfather a member of Young Italy who had been condemned to death as the head of the conspiracy, which penalty he, however, successfully escaped. A telegram from Mazzini instructing the organization to give Crispi promptly 30,000 ducats to begin with on the account of the Neapolitan Committee of Young Italy, and let him get to work. While at Malta in 1855, he joined the Masonic Lodge, Zetland, under English jurisdiction, from which he was shortly expelled for the theft of 800 francs from one of its members. He went to London shortly afterwards. There, Lord Palmerston had returned to power. By becoming an ardent admirer of fanatical follower of Mazzini, Crispi simultaneously entered the good graces of Palmerston, who was on the very best of terms with the Italian leader. In 1856, believing that Napoleon III, in cooperation with Cavour, was the secret arbiter of the destinies of Italy and the greatest obstacle to the realization of his own republican schemes, Mazzini induced Crispi to go to Paris. While he was there, a number of attempts were made on the life of the emperor, among others that of Orsini on January 14th, 1858. But, what is today? 13th. But, though strongly suspected of participation in these conspiracies by the police or Paris, no evidence for a direct charge of complicity against Crispi was ever obtained. However, it is known that he and Orsini had previously met in London, where the latter had shown him how to make the famous bombs, the use and manufacture of which Crispi afterwards taught his followers in Sicily. By August 3, 1858, he was back in London, the Paris police having developed too great a zeal on his behalf during his sojourn in the French capital. At last, by 1860, the various Italian conspiracies crystallized into one. Everything was ready for the fulfillment of Mazzini's dream of united Italy. Bertini, Bixio, and Crispi decided to go to Turin themselves to see General Garibaldi, and after the British minister Sir James Hudson had confirmed certain information on conditions in Palmero, which had been furnished by the Genoese deputies, the general seemed at last inclined to take action. He ordered Bixio to Genoa to charter a ship and Crispi to Milan is that Geneva? No. that's Genoa, to charter a ship and Crispi to Milan to receive from Enrico Bassana the arms and the money already subscribed. This subscription was begun by General Garibaldi himself, and in view of later developments, it is a significant fact that one of the contributions he received for the famous expedition of the 1000 was the sum of 50,000 francs from the Jew Cornelius Herz. 12,000 guns were in the hands of Massimo d'Azeglio, the governor of Milan, who, by order of the government, surrendered them to the rebels. Finally, General Garibaldi arrived in Genoa on April 14th. On the 16th, Crispi returned to Turin, where he saw the Minister of the Interior, Farini, who, having by that time changed his mind concerning the Italian expedition, had ceased to be a dictator and had assumed the attitude of a diplomat satellite of Cavour. He proved quite intractable. Back in Genoa, Crispi found Lafarna again, this time with orders to report all developments to Cavour. Cavour, warned not to interfere with Garibaldi, raised no obstacles to the progress of the plot. He only advised waiting for better news from the island of Sicily and promised to cooperate with 1,000,000 guns as soon as the time for the expedition seemed propitious. Still, Garibaldi hesitated. The Sicilian news was contradictory. On April 26, Crispi received from Niccolo Fabrizi a message from Malta reading, "Failure in the provinces and in the town of Palermo. Many exiles arriving at Malta on English ships." Luckily, a few days later, a communication from Palermo published by the Gazette of Turin told of the great proportions assumed by the insurrection in Sicily. This communication had been invented and written at Genoa by Crispi for the purposes of overcoming the last scruples of Garibaldi. One day, the 2nd of May, Crispi and Garibaldi were alone in a room looking seaward, in the villa Spagnola Quarti. They were talking about the expedition. Crispi, as usual, was fighting the vacillations of Garibaldi. Suddenly, the general interrupted him, saying, "You are the only one to encourage me in this enterprise. Everyone else tries to dissuade me. Why? Because I am profoundly convinced that it will be helpful to the fatherland and that it will cover you with glory. I fear only one thing, the uncertainty of the sea." "I answer for the sea," said Garibaldi. "And I answer for the land," said Crispi. Garibaldi was persuaded, and the die was cast. After the victorious expedition of the 1000 had placed the group of conspirators in the power of Sicily, each was rewarded according to his merits. Crispi becoming Minister of Foreign Affairs, Cavour had died on June 6, 1861, poisoned, it is said, on May 28th by orders of Mazzini. Until 1861, Crispi had cooperated wholeheartedly with the revolutionaries, but as time wore on, he began to think that it might be more to his personal advantage to serve the king than Mazzini. His plan was discovered by Mazzini's spies, and in 1862, the deputy of Castelvetrano found himself facing death for treason at the hands of his former friends and accomplices under conditions that enslaved him, body and soul, forever after to the international sect. Sounds like a lot of tomfoolery. Early in April 1862, he attended a Freemasonic dinner of the Association's Emancipatrice at Turin. Suddenly, he felt ill, very ill. Fire seemed to be burning within him. He was in the throes of the most appalling agony. Instead of offering assistance, the other guests began to laugh. Then, one of them rising, spoke to him severely in the following terms. "Francisco, you went to visit the King Victor Emmanuel without telling us of your intention, and you offered him your secret services. You let him know that you were ready to go over at the first opportunity. Till then, your opinions had been Republican. Well, that is treason. We have condemned you. You are poisoned. You are a dead man." The poison had indeed been administered in the bread. Among the organizers of the banquet was the Baker Dolfi, who had formerly contributed to the expulsion of the Grand Duke of Tuscany and who had become one of the members of the Radical Directing Committee. On this occasion, Dolfi had kneaded the bread himself, and each guest had found his place at the table marked by a small roll bearing his name, traced on its golden crust by a fillet of whitish dough. All the guests, agreeably surprised, had congratulated the baker for his delicate attention, but the piece of bread marked crispy had been separately kneaded and contained the poison. Crispy realized full well that he was lost. He knew there was no escape and that all the exits to the banquet hall were closed. Moreover, he was too weak, too tight. Without recrimination and in the throes of acute pain, he dropped into a chair upon which, withering in agony, he waited a lingering death. The others surrounded him, watching him in silence with profound contempt. Suddenly, a door opened, a curtain was raised, and a man appeared. He advanced slowly. It was Mazzini. "Poor wretch," said he to the dying man, "I pity you." At these words, Crispy looked up. His dim eyes gleamed suddenly, and he murmured feebly, "Yes, ambition made me betray. It is true. I was going to sell myself, but I die. Do not insult my agony. Do not mock me. I suffer too much." "Do not speak to you in your derision," answered the Grand Master. "Francisco Crispy, I forgive you. Drink this. You are saved. You will be reborn." So saying, he forced his teeth apart and, pressing a small vial to the lips of the dying man, poured the counter poison down his parched throat. After his last words, Crispy had collapsed. Some time passed. Was he still alive? He seemed a corpse. Little by little, sweat gathered on his face and hands. Then slowly, his livid countenance regained some color. For a long time, he seemed inert. Then his eyelids opened, and looking around with a stunned expression of incomprehension, he asked, "Where am I?" "You have returned from the realm of the dead," murmured Mazzini gravely. "Oh, yes, I remember now. Mercy, mercy," he added suddenly, recalling realities and clinging desperately to life. "I live indeed, master. Is it not a dream?" "You live, yes, Francisco, but henceforth you are more completely enslaved than the last of the Negroes for whose freedom they are fighting over there in America. You live again, and your ambition will be gratified. You will be minister of the monarchy. You will hold in your hands the reins of government, but without betraying us, without selling yourself. You will part from us, not privately, but publicly. We will denounce you, and while denouncing you, we will push you to power. It is the monarchy that you will betray by executing our orders when we shall have made you minister of the crown, and you will obey us in all things, even should the orders we give you seem contradictory, even should their execution cause you to pass for a madman in the eyes of Europe. Yes, Francisco Crispy, from this day forward you belong to us, for you must never forget that. Should you place us in a position where it might be expedient to cut short your own existence a second time, no power in the world could save you from the death, the sufferings of which you have known today. Live then for masonry, fight loyalty and the church. You will be the gravedigger of this house of Savoy. It is only an instrument for us, and we have condemned it to disappear after it has served our purpose. This plan of action was carried out. In 1864, Crispy, on orders from his master, became a royalist and duly denounced Mazzini. That is the explanation of his often incoherent and erratic policies in after life. Mazzini's promise was fulfilled, and Crispy became Minister of the Interior in 1878. In 1877, he had been on tour to Paris, Berlin, London, and Vienna. In Paris, he had seen Thiers, Jules Favre, and Gambetta. In Germany, Prince Bismarck, with whom he already had an acquaintance of some years' standing and who shared his aversion for France and the Roman Catholic Church. In England, Lord Derby and Mr. Gladstone. But the true purpose of his mission in these lands is still unknown. As a consequence of his interview with Bismarck at Salzburg, Italy, fearing France threw herself into the hands of the Iron Chancellor. Germany henceforth was to hold her as a dog ready to be set at either against Austria or France when it suited her purpose. The Triple Alliance was formed on May 20th, 1882. Crispy's ascension to the ministry was therefore a victory of prime importance to the sect. After the death of Manzini in 1872, Adriano Lemmy took over his Masonic heritage and, along with the rest, his slave Francisco Crispy, who, with the Jew Barazoli, became his right-hand man. King Victor Emmanuel died on January 9, 1878, and was succeeded by Humbert I. That same year saw the death of Pope Pius IX and the ascension to the papacy of Leo XIII. In 1884, Humbert I was initiated into Masonry as Knight Kadosh under conditions of the greatest secrecy, and a lodge, that of Savoia Illuminatia, was founded in his honor. In spite of his exalted Masonic position, the monarch's political information was always strictly censored by his Masonic superiors. From 1887 to 1891, and again from 1893 to 1896, Crispy acted the part of prime minister. In order to enable him to curry favor with the common people, Lemmy occasionally authorized him to execute political turnovers. The Grand Master Lemmy once said to Humbert, "Fear not. The socialism of Crispy will not last. It will provoke no riots. It is simply an electoral maneuver." And the king was much gratified at being so well informed. There, at least, the 33rd degree king was not deceived. If now and again Crispy resumed his revolutionary complexion, it was only to obtain the votes of those whom he persecuted mercilessly once he had obtained power. To him, a change of opinion was as easy as a change of shirt. In 1889 came the scandal of the Banca Romana, revealed as such through the efforts of Giovanni Giolitti, and in 1892 that of Panama involving another, namely the Grand Cordon of Cornelius Herz, any one of which could have swamped the political career of any unprotected individual. Crispy, though seriously implicated, was supported through the impossible situation by the Masonic Brotherhood. The Abyssinian War itself, the resort of Masonic intrigue, was the terrible maneuver calculated to ruin the House of Savoy in the eyes of the Italian people. It was known that at the time of the disaster of Ottawa, the succession of Adriano Lemmy to the Grand Mastership of the Grand Orient of Italy was open, and that competition for the position was keen. Some favor the candidacy of Bovio, others that of Nathan, later mayor of Rome, but Crispy had promised General Baratarini, a Masonic dignitary, that he should have the preference above all others on condition that he win a victory over Negus. Such an achievement would give Italy another Garibaldi, a popular hero, while simultaneously providing Crispy himself with a useful tool and the position of top dog, which had never been his before. But the disastrous defeat of his candidate by Menelik at the Battle of Ottawa on March 2, 1896, resulted in the fall of Crispy, not that of the king. The agent of Lemmy had played his part, but the great game of the Federated Secret Societies had only suffered a temporary setback. In 1900, King Humbert I was assassinated at Monza. Crispy died in 1901. The fate of Italy is the fate of all nations governed by political rings. Italy in the 19th century seems to have been the vortex of the intrigue direct against Christianity, which today ravages the world, carrying in its wake a general disregard of all ideals, decency, duty, and loyalty. Liberty is corrupted into licentiousness, marital fidelity into perversion, equality into equality of low standards, and fraternity into a brotherhood based on mutual slavery under the yoke of international finance. And the monster grows apace. Today it bestrides the world under the name Bolshevism. but it is the same old monster, the heresy of the first centuries of the Christian era and the Middle Ages, namely Gnosticism. All right, so chapter 32 is probably like 50 pages, so I'll just read for a good minute, and then we'll stop. So you'll see chapter 32 a couple times, because I don't want to just burn through it, because that's not right. But I'll go until I'm ready. Chapter 32 must be an important dude. Adriano Lemmy. This chapter is compiled largely of extracts, some transcribed verbatim and others elaborated to include information necessary to the reader from Adriano Lemmy by Domenico Margiotta, 33rd degree. Adriano Lemmy was born of Roman Catholic parents at Leghorn, Tuscany on April 30th, 1822. He was the son of Fortunio Lemmy and Teresa Merlino, his lawful wife. At an early age, he became the despair of his parents. He was desolate, frequented evil haunts, and formed undesirable friendships. Running away from home on December 29th, 1843, he forged a letter stating under the letterhead of Falconut and Company that a credit for his account was to be opened on Pastor Brothers, bankers at Marcellus, where shortly after his arrival he scraped acquaintance with Monsieur and Madame Grand-Bobine, whom he was soon accused of having robbed of 300 francs. This evidence against him was overwhelming, and he was condemned to a year in prison for that and other minor offenses, and also sentenced to 5 years on probation. He served his term and bolted to Constantinople, arriving there early in April 1845. He eked out a precarious existence, first as a kitchen hand, then as the assistant in the shop of an old apothecary, whose preparations he peddled in the streets of Galatica. His employer had a friend, a Polish rabbi who, having been condemned for conspiracy in Russia, had taken refuge in Constantinople. This man took a fancy to him, and in an effort to curry favor with the Jews, Lemmy presently asked if he might be received into the religion of Moses. As a diplomatic move, the suggestion was a great success for the apothecary and the rabbi, proud and jubilant to have secured a neophyte. He taught him the Talmud, while another rabbi, Abraham Margiaro, instructed him in the mysteries of the Kabbalah. Together, they initiated him into the secrets of magic, in which he proved an apt pupil, and his lot was much improved. But the old apothecary died in 1847, and Lemmy found himself without employment. The Polish rabbi, having left Constantinople, he stayed on a while under the protection of his friend Margaraggio. In those days, the few Freemasons coming to Paro were English. Freemasonry had been introduced into Turkey in 1738, but until the Crimean War, it suffered many vicissitudes. The English saw their lodges fade away for want of active members, for the government did not favor them. Adriano Lemmy was supposed to have been initiated into Freemason in 1848 by an English Mason, but the ceremony seems to have somehow been irregular, as it had to be repeated at a later date. Finally, the era of his trials seemed to end. In 1849, some of his English Masonic friends gave him a letter of introduction to the great Magyar Kossuth, who had come to Constantinople, a fugitive from public opprobrium in his own country. To save him from starvation, Kossuth took him as his servant at low wages, but he gradually succeeded in ingratiating himself with his patron till finally he became his secretary on the recommendation of Mazzini, with whom he was already in correspondence. When Kossuth went to the United States in 1851, he was accompanied by Lemmy. They were forced to travel via Gibraltar and London as the French authorities refused Kossuth's permission to land in France, and Lemmy, knowing that he was wanted by the French police, knew better than to try to do so. In Lodge number 133 in Cincinnati, USA, Kossuth received the Masonic initiation. On the 2nd of December, 1851, Prince Louis Napoleon, the President of the French Republic, announced to the people and the army his intention of submitting to the referendum the plan of a constitution founded on the system favored by his uncle. It was a coup d'etat. At this news, Lemmy left Kossuth in America and went to join Mazzini and Ledru Rollin in London. By this time, Mazzini had already established his reputation as an international intriguer. The youth movement of the day was already organized. The societies composing it were. God, is this long? Hold on. Okay. Young Italy, founded by Mazzini in 1831. Young Poland, founded by Simon Konarski, 1834. Young England, founded by Benjamin Disraeli, 1834. Young Europe, founded by Mazzini, 1834. Young Switzerland, founded by Emery, 1835. Young Ireland, founded by Smith O'Brien, 1843. Young Germany, founded by Hecker and Struve, 1848. The oath taker by the members of the Young Italy reads as follows. In the name of God and of Italy, in the name of all the martyrs of the holy Italian cause who have fallen beneath foreign and domestic tyranny, by the duties which bind me to the land wherein God has placed me, and to the brothers whom God has given me, by the love innate in all men I bear to the country that gave my mother birth and will be the home of my children. By the hatred innate in all men I bear to evil, injustice, usurpation, and arbitrary rule, by the blush that rises in my brow when I stand before the citizens of other lands, to know that I have no rights of citizenship, no country, and no national flag, by the aspiration that thrills my soul towards that liberty for which it was created and is impotent to exert, towards the good it was created to strive after, and is impotent to achieve in the silence and isolation of slavery, by the memory of our former greatness and the sense of our present degradation, by the tears of Italian mothers for their sons dead on the scaffold, in prison, or in exile, by the sufferings of the millions. I, believing in the mission entrusted by God to Italy and the duty of every Italian to strive to attempt its fulfillment, convinced that were God has ordained that a nation shall be, he has given the requisite power to create it, that the people are the depositaries of that power, and that in its right direction for the people and by the people lies the secret of victory. Convinced that virtue consists in action and sacrifice and strength in union and constancy of purpose, I give my name to Young Italy, an association of men holding the same faith, and swear to dedicate myself wholly and forever to the endeavor with them to constitute Italy one free, independent, republican nation, to promote by every means in my power, whether by written or spoken word or by action, the education of my Italian brothers towards the aim of Young Italy, towards association, the sole means of its accomplishment, and to virtue, which alone can render the conquest lasting. To abstain from enrolling myself in any other association from this time forth, to obey all the instructions in conformity with the spirit of Young Italy, given me by those who represent with me the union of my Italian brothers, and to keep the secret of these instructions even at the cost of my life. To assist my brothers of the association both by action and counsel, now and forever. This I do swear, invoking upon my head the wrath of God, the abhorrence of man, and the infamy of the perjurer. I have ever betray the whole, if I ever betray the whole or a part of this my oath, the fusion of Young Italy and the carbonism evidently did not take place until, wait, that's it. That's the end of his oath. The fusion of Young Italy and the Carbonarism evidently did not take place till after April 8th, 1839, for in a letter of that date, Mazzini writes to L.A. Malagari at Lausanne, it is a mixture of Young Italy and Carbonarism. They have had me approached indirectly to know if I accept the fusion. After 1851, Lemmy began playing an important part in all politico-messianic assassinations, and in all the popular insurrections of which Italy was the scene. On behalf of Mazzini, he kept up relations with the revolutionaries of Tuscany, and it was he who inspired the attempt to assassinate the counselor of the Grand Duke's minister, Baldascaroni, in broad daylight on April 21st, 1852. A letter from which we quote, written from Malta by Francisco Crispi to Mazzini, dated November 3rd, 1853. Gives a most interesting sidelight on the relations then existing between the great Italian revolutionary, his ally Crispi, and Andrea Lemmy, whom Crispi already recognized as the agent of an organization inimical to his ideals. Brother, the die is cast at the present moment. An uprising in Sicily is imminent, if indeed it has not already taken place. God grant it may not prove a second 6th of February. Knowing that I was here, you should have forewarned me. Those to whom you have seen fit to entrust the initiative will not be able to exert any influence whatsoever in the province of Palermo and Messina. Their names, indeed, may even be greeted there with hostility and bring out a reaction. Now, without Palermo and Messina, every attempt in Sicily will prove vain. But what is done, and our plain duty now is to work together in helping on the undertaking and, as far as possible, in warding off evil consequences. Let me know the plan of action and what orders you have issued to the leaders. Although I have little regard for them, I intend to do my duty, and this for the good of our country and party, upon whose already tarnished reputation another failure would bring utter ruin. You will remember that ever since 1850 I have been ready to hasten to Sicily, and that at that time, we were working to form the National Committee and raise the loan that should provide funds for any great emergency. Then the Sicilian Committee was formed and speedily dissolved, while you worked to prepare an uprising in northern and central Italy, forgetting Sicily entirely. But not so, my friends, and I, who were convinced that the greatest possibility of success lay in this island. Nor was this all. After your misfortunes in Lombardy, you forgot your old friends and flung yourself into the arms of men who, up to that very moment, had held you and your theories up to ridicule, but who had been clever enough to deceive you through Signor Lemmy, to whom they had declared their intention to act. I am no more their enemy than are any of the friends who belong to the party opposed to Calvi. On February 6, 1853, an incipient insurrection broke out in Milan, then under Austrian dominion, as the result of a proclamation signed by Mazzini and Kossuth that it was sent by Lemmy from Switzerland to the revolutionary Lombards is a fact well known in Italian masonry. Though implicated, the Swiss and Piedmontese governments tried to appear unconcerned. Numerous refugees from northern Italy went to Switzerland or Piedmont following the instructions transmitted by Lemmy. Piedmont, assisted by England, who was secretly helping Mazzini's masonry, tried to induce the Emperor of Austria to issue a decree confiscating the properties of the revolutionary refugees, but a bloody protest was made against the measure on the 18th of February when, by order of Kossuth and Mazzini, a revolutionary fanatic, made an attempt against the life of the emperor. Lemmy was chosen to arm the assassin, who was a Hungarian and a mutual friend of both Kossuth and himself. Switzerland, under threat of severance of diplomatic relations, was then obliged to banish indiscriminately all political refugees. Then came the Crimean War, the real causes of which were known only to the chiefs of Freemasonry. England and Piedmont worked up a quarrel with Russia about Turkey over the respective spheres of influence of the Christian Greek and Catholic churches at Jerusalem. This rivalry was a little real was of little real consequence either to England or Piedmont, but it served to turn France against Russia on the pretext of protecting Turkey. The truth was that for a long time, long before the Hungarian insurrection of Kossuth, the secret chiefs of Freemasonry, headed by Lord Palmerston, had made the plan according to which Prussia was to be exalted at the expense of Austria. German unity was to be achieved to the advantage of the Prussian monarchy, as well as that of Italy, to the benefit of the House of Savoy, and a Polish Magyar state was to be created. Fearing that the Hungarian insurrection might spread to his Polish provinces, a community of monarchic interests had impelled the Tsar to reach an understanding with the Austrian emperor, which had helped to hinder the success of the Magyar revolutionaries. Until the Entente could be broken up, the Masonic chiefs knew that German and Italian Italy would remain a dream. And I think I'll stop there. I can't feel my fingers, it's so cold right now.